Hey guys, how's it going? Big day here today. We're gonna start on a job that I've been wanting to do for a really long time on the RZR. Today is the day we start the RS1 front diff conversion. We got the 2017 RZR Turbo right there, AKA the Battle Wagon, the flagship unit of the Adrenaline Junkie Prod channel. I've owned this machine since it was brand new. 5 years now, and it's evolved quite a bit since then. This modification, this upgrade is something I've been wanting to do for, heck, creeping up around 2 years when this first kind of started becoming a thing. The weak link on a built RZR like this, of this era, always kind of tends to be the front differential. So we're gonna swap in a fully built RS1/Turbo S-Diff out of a newer machine into this bad boy right here. It does require some fabrication and adapter brackets. It does require trimming the frame a little bit. It does require basically removing the whole front clip and suspension and everything from the machine. And it's also advisable to relocate your winch to a front mount, like on the bumper or something like that. So we'll be doing that for ease of use and a few other things along the way. You gotta remove the rad, the intercooler, all that junk up front to get to what you need to get to modify that machine to fit that new, bigger diff. The diff is about twice the size, so let's dig into the box, let's see what we got. We're installing a brand new RS1 diff out of a 2021 Plus model with extra pinion support, and this is a Hill Killer diff setup. The Hill Killer is built by Joe Kaufman from CCM. He has developed this Hill Killer diff, which a ton of the guys are using as their go-to diff now in the hill climb racing scene, and is probably the best diff you can swap into one of these machines for aggressive trail riding as well. I've heard a lot of people saying you can easily run 35s and push the bar. Running my 32s will be perfect with this thing. I'll really be able to push it. I won't have to worry about landing on those front wheels as much now with a bit of spin and four-wheel drive, grenading that front diff. This is gonna be an in-depth video, but I'm taking you through it step by step. My goal here is to show you how to do this from start to finish, so that if you're worried whether or not you can handle this, you should be able to watch this video and either follow along or know, hey, maybe this isn't the job for me, or I'm not set up for this, or hey, this is what's involved in it. I think I can pull this off with a few buddies and a case of beer. What we're gonna do is we're gonna lay this video out as going over the parts. We're gonna go over the machine quickly. We're gonna do a quick teardown. I'm not gonna go in depth, step by step on how to tear everything apart or reinstall everything later. If you need specific help on certain aspects of the machine that you haven't worked on before, I'm sure there's YouTube videos out there that can help you with that. So we're gonna kind of focus more the meat and potatoes on the actual differential itself, the retrofit, the install, and buttoning it all up, and all the details involved in that. Let's dig into these parts. I'm really excited. Big shout out to Joe Kaufman. He's the guy who developed this Hill Killer setup. If you want more information on this diff right away, then head on over to RZRBigDiff.com. Let's get rolling. This is gonna be a big job, so. Here we have it. We got the two boxes. We've got the custom bracket, and then we've got the brand new fully built diff right here. Doing this, if you have a RZR Turbo, you can run your stock front axles. If you have a RZR 1000 or a non-turbo RZR model that you're doing this conversion to, you're gonna have to run the turbo front axles. I'm gonna slap in two brand new front axles because I'm gonna be silly not to. I just put two new rears in with my brand new rear tranny, or I mean, not rear tranny, but with my brand new tranny. So this machine is gonna be mechanically like 110% and ready for a serious thrash in this season. And you'll be able to see me testing this diff and pushing it to its limits in the upcoming videos. Okay, first, let's crack into this adapter bracket. This is the most important part. This is what makes this swap easy. CCM, Kaufman custom machine. Gear case shipped with no oil, so yeah. We'll talk about the oil discussion also later. What's the best oil to run in your front diff? There's a ton of various opinions on this. We'll approach that a little later once all this is in the machine. Adrenaline Junkie. So full disclosure, Joe I talked to him, I told him about the channel. He really wants a video out there showing everybody what goes into this install, because realistically, as far as a retrofit is concerned, this is far from intricate. It's a pretty straightforward install. So the goal here is to show everybody how to do this so you can feel comfortable buying this. Now, if you've done any research on these, you'll know the most important part of this kit is this adapter bracket, because essentially this is what makes it almost a bolt-on. This thing is beefy. There are brackets on the market that are made out of just metal or stamped metal without the billet aluminum reinforcements here. Stay away from those. They stress fracture, they crack. You need this bracket. The only two brackets that you want to run when you're doing a conversion is the CCM one, the Kaufman custom machine bracket, or the All Things UTV bracket. Regardless of where you buy from, get the identical same bracket. The difference being the All Things UTV brackets come powder coated black, I believe here. I'm just gonna paint mine. And they say All Things UTV on the side, not CCM. All Things UTV, as of the time of filming this video, which is May 2022, does not stock and sell the Hill Killer setup. If you want that Hill Killer diff, then you gotta go through CCM. You gotta send them a diff or buy a diff through them and get them to build it for you and ship it to you. And you can get the bracket through them as well. I wanted that Hill Killer setup, which is why I went directly to Joe Kaufman. Why not go straight to the source to get the best? Here is this badass bracket. You got that top metal plate that we're gonna paint. We've got the two side billet machined pieces, as well as the reinforcement tabs here for the A-arm. You've got the hardware that comes with it. Another piece right there. Other bolt, all high grade hardware. Adapter there to hook your new diff to your old wiring. Plug and play, that's the way. Some more hardware. Oh, nice, another sticker. I'm like, why'd they only send one sticker? They sent two. Okay, that's that. And they were even nice enough to full color print me a set of instructions here. I read through their instructions before I even ordered this diff. It's really straightforward. It's very well laid out in the instructions. If you have any fabrication knowledge at all, you should be able to handle this. We'll go through it all step by step. It's gonna be chatty, it's gonna be drawn out, it's gonna be wordy. We're not gonna skip any steps. So you know, get a beverage. This might be a 2 or 3 episode one where you break it up, or a marathon if you really want to understand this. Consider this a school project or something, and we're hitting it together. So I am going to be chatty because I want to go over all the details. I will release the inner OCD in this one. We're going all out. With that out of the way, let's get into the diff. This diff, oh my God. It gets me excited. First of all, I gotta say, packaging, top notch. Really nicely packaged, because this box came like this, like literally ripped open, barely held together. Don't even get me going on important duties on this bad boy to Canada. Yeah. Speaking of which, All Things UTV has a Canadian distributor. It is Cutter Loose out of Alberta. I don't know, I got a sticker here. Cutterloose.ca. He's the distributor for all the Razor 8's tender springs, as well as I believe the brackets for the RS1 diff conversion. $3,500 to do this. So it's big money, but it's gonna be one of those mods where it's well worth it. It's kind of like, you know, am I gonna splurge for some of the bigger, higher end parts? You kind of second guess yourself, and then when you try them, there's no going back. All these are bench tested, by the way, after they're built, which is nice. So let's pull this diff out of there. Look at that sweet piece of mechanical art. Metal art at its finest. This is a badass diff. Hilliard style differential. This is Polaris finally coming to the plate with a real front diff. In stock form, these are excellent differentials. Built this way, it's about as close to bulletproof as this setup can get. This thing is huge. Once we pull out the OEM diff, we will take a comparison shot side by side. Just the way this presents itself and looks, and the size of this thing. It's freaking huge. It's literally like twice the size of the diff that's in there right now. And boy, oh boy, is there a lot more meat on this, a lot more metal. This case is not gonna twist and grenade on us. A big problem with the OEM diffs was how they mounted, and they only screwed into the bottom. This thing here now, so this is actually the bottom of the diff. This is the top, this is how it sits. You get those two big bolts going through there in the nice rubber bushings. That is so much beefier than what's in there right now. Just in case you guys are wondering, you should be able to read that part number there. We've got our vent plug. Back to what I was saying, I reached out to Joe Kaufman. He hooked me up with a deal. I did not get this diff for free. I paid for this differential. This is going to be a 100% honest review. When you guys follow along in the future videos and when I do a review of this product and the Hill Killer setup, you will get a 100% unbiased review of whether or not this bad boy is worth the money and is really what they say it is. I feel it is. I've had a ton of messages and talked to a ton of people online regarding this setup, and everyone recommends it. Joe was really nice. He was stoked about the video, so he gave me a discount. I still paid the majority of the cost associated with this. So just keep that in mind. Oftentimes people are like, oh yeah, don't complain about free parts. No such thing as free, guys. Sometimes I don't pay for a specific part because I provide an exchange of services. Creating these videos, creating the content takes a hell of a lot of time and resources. So it's a trade-off. It's not free. So get that thought out of your head, guys. The next section of the video is gonna show you quick clips. The real part of the vid will start when we go to pull that front diff out. I really hope this video will be helpful for you. I hope this video will answer all of your questions. If for some reason it doesn't, or you have another question, or you have a comment, or you have a tip or a trick that can help me in the future or others watching this video, then leave it in the comment section below. Smash that thumbs up button, guys. Smashing the thumbs up button really helps the videos get searched and found on YouTube by other people like you that might be looking for help or that are just interested in the topic. And also, if you enjoy this video and you found it helpful, check out the other content on the channel, both how-to videos as well as some of our cool riding content. And don't forget to subscribe. Smash that subscribe button, guys. That also really helps out the channel. And if you want some cool Team AJP swag, this is our original or OG. This is like a classic. We got t-shirts in various styles and sizes, as well as a ton of really cool stickers. Look at that. That's a nice sticker right there. So is that. So yeah, check out the Shopify store. We got a ton of cool swag. That's that. Let's dig in. We are gonna pull the front windshield. We're gonna pull a bunch of the front fascia. We're gonna try and leave the roof on. I don't think that needs to come off. The cage doesn't have to be moved or anything like that. This whole front clip's gotta come off, as well as all the front suspension. As you're stripping this thing down, we're gonna remove the rad and we're gonna remove the intercooler. On a non-turbo model, obviously no intercooler. Get yourself some fluids. It's gonna be a good time to flush and change all the coolant. It's also a good time to get yourself whatever fluid you're gonna be running in your front diff and any other service components that you're gonna need in and around this area. I'm also gonna use this as an opportunity to get into summer mode and do a bunch of other maintenance. So I'm gonna pull this front windshield off, and I get to leave it off because I don't like running a full windshield in the spring and summer. In the fall, I don't put it on until it gets cold. Razor looks better already without it. I've got aftermarket skid plates. I got a gusset kit on the front end of the machine. This bumper and the exo cage adds a lot of work. If you don't have bumpers, consider yourself lucky. If you have like easy to remove bumpers, consider yourself lucky. These bumpers and this exo cage is a pain in the ass to get off. So I'm gonna get started by removing all the hardware fastening the front clip on. We'll set that aside, get everything nice and loose, and then we'll move on to getting the front bumper off. But before that, I'm gonna drop the front section of the skid plate so I have easier access to all the hardware under there and the lower mounting locations on the bumper. Obviously, the disassembly and reassembly will vary based on the type of aftermarket accessories that you have on your machine. All right, I've removed most of the bolts for the fenders and the front clip here, as you can see. I've also got a bunch of rock lights and wiring mounted and run through all this, so I'm gonna have to trim a bunch of zip ties and get that out of the way. It's easier to just remove some extra stuff than to leave it in. You guys know how it is. Sometimes spending 5 minutes removing a few extra pieces can save you 15 or 20 minutes down the line trying to jimmy rig something in there. So this all comes apart really nice. I've got to just get the bumper off now. All rusty. Put some knocker loose. What's your favorite kind of penetrating lube? I've had a lot of good luck with the knocker loose. And the freeze off works really good from CRC also. Leave a comment, let me know what your favorite penetrating lube is. Magical stuff sometimes in the shop, as I'm sure a lot of you guys know. All right, the bumper is off, the front section of the skid plate is off, the fair lead can come off here, and the front clip is just being held on right now by a few wires for the headlights and the rock light here, so that can come off. So we'll pull that off next. Everything's going nice and smooth. This job, like I said earlier on, it's not really that difficult. It's labor intensive in the sense that there's a lot to tear down and a lot to reassemble, but the only real more intricate part will come when it comes to trimming the frame sections and mounting the bracket, and I really don't feel that's going to be too difficult. All right, front clip is off. We'll see what we're going to pick away at next. Look how big the rad and the intercooler is on this thing. It's pretty sweet. A lot going on back here. When you take a hit to the front and there's damage, it gets expensive quick, because generally speaking, if you take a harder hit to the front, you're taking out the intercooler and the rad, and then you're basically dead in the water without those. And it continues. So I've got the rads pretty much unhooked. I still have the hoses attached. I've got to drain the cooling system next. Like I said, all this stuff is pretty easy, just tracing down where some bolts are. There's not too much holding this in. I had a bunch of wiring in my my main wiring hub, like my bus bar, right up here, so I had to kind of shift some of that out of the way, which took an extra few minutes. I've unhooked the vent lines from the overflow reservoir. I'm deciding to remove the suspension, get the shocks out of the way, remove the A-arms, get everything moved out of the way before I drain the cooling system, just because it'll be easier access to get to everything, and I probably won't make as much of the mess on the floor draining the system if all this crap's out of the way. While I'm in here, I've also got to upgrade my steering system because I broke a tie rod, and I just did a quick fix on the trail. So I've got the OEM ones on there, so I'm going to put heavy duty ones on there. I'm going to do some wheel bearings, I'm going to do some brake pads while I'm in here. So I'm going to replace an axle. This axle's broken. When I broke my tie rod, I broke the axle, the outer. So that's also a big reason I'm putting new ones on. I would have put new ones on anyways for this diff, and I recommend you do too, unless you know that the current axles are in good shape. And what I mean good shape is the splines and all that. If you have an old sloppy diff, sometimes it'll cause damage to the splines going into the diff. You don't want to put a sloppy axle into a new diff. It just doesn't make sense when you're spending this kind of money doing a job this big. You want to eliminate all the possible variables for failure or issues. So just slap some new axles in there. Whether you go OEM or aftermarket, I mean, that's up to you. A lot of debate on what the best axle out there is. It all depends on what you're using them for, what your budget is, what you're expecting out of them. So yeah, let's get digging into here. We'll pull all this apart, and then like I said, while we're in there, we might as well do some other work. Tie rod's out, calipers off, hub's off. Okay, now we can do the hub. Now I got the hardware out for the hub, so we can remove that. Axle will come out. Oh yeah, that thing is just limp. Hear that? She is grenaded in there. I finished her off good. I kept running it hard, full send in 3-wheel drive, so she's chewed in there. So I'll just hammer that out in a sec, the lower portion of the hub. Next, we'll undo the shock bolts and tie the shock out of the way somewhere, zip tie it somewhere up to the frame or something like that, so it's just hanging there. I've got a limit strap. You may or may not have that. You can hang it up out of the way with the shock. Then we'll take the A-arms off. Shock is out of the way, calipers hung up out of the way, off from the frame. Everything's kind of out of the way. Now you just got to pull the axle. These should come out pretty easy because the hubs are sloppy. Woo! That one's actually pretty good. The other one pretty much just fell out when I pulled on it. The other one's puking diff fluid everywhere. You can see there That one's pretty clean and dry as far as the seal is concerned. This seal is shot, and I think it has a lot to do with all the power going to this axle. After I blew the other axle, I think this one just took a thrashing and it just shook apart the diff. The diff housing itself and everything looks good. I've rebuilt this diff 3 times. It's got full Sandcraft RCR internals in it, and yeah, it worked a hell of a lot better than it did stock. But I cannot wait to get this bad boy in there. So next step is we're going to pull the A-arms. Things are going really well, like I said. Good time to inspect your ball joints. I just replaced these. These are heavy duty ball joints anyways. They're the Super ATV HD ball joints. Yeah, there's no play in them, they feel tight. They're the thread-in ones. These are their chrome ollie arms. We're back. So I left off yesterday with just having the A-arms left to remove. It was getting late, so I just put it off till today. And before I get into that, I'm actually going to pull this plate apart. I'm going to pull these bolts off, take this main plate piece off, and take this plate, and I'm going to paint them so that they don't rust on me. I'm just going to spray paint them a couple coats in red to match the rest of the accessories on the RZR so that it doesn't rust up on me. When I do the A-arms, I'll probably just pull the rad. It'll make it easier to get to the winch. I'll remove the winch. I'll remove the winch plate. I'll also, at that point, remove my tie rod assemblies, disconnect them from the rack, because I'm going to put a new set of tie rods on their HD ones. So it's going to be really easy to access all that right now. And then once all that's out, we'll just give this a good clean, wipe everything down. I'm going to clean the rads. Look at that rad. Look at how plugged up that is. That's completely like cemented. This corner too. You cannot get in there to wash. No matter how you spray, you can't get that lower section or these lower corners because of the plastics. So obviously this is a massive rad. It's never caused an issue for me, but it's gonna be a really good time to get in there, soak that rad. I'm gonna wash it all out. I'm gonna wash the intercooler and the rad and get it like as clean as new so that for the next while, she's cooling as efficiently as she can. Then we'll get digging into doing the trimming that we need to mount the adapter bracket, and then we can get the new diff in there. All right, just gonna spray this guy down with some brake clean. Note, these holes have a different offset. It's not a mess up. One's offset more than the other. So one is the top and the bottom. So I used the punch and I marked the back of the plate so that I know which way it goes back on, just in case. Big shout out to CRC. They send me a ton of chemicals to use. I've always been a fan of CRC. They are the godfathers of brake clean. Arguably the inventors of. They make a ton of wicked chemicals. And chemicals are one of those things where like you do get what you pay for often. All right, let's let that dry and then we can hit it with some paint. Now we'll hit it with some Rust-Oleum. I love this stuff. Great budget paint. Get a few coats on there nice and thick. Once it cures up, it dries pretty slow when you put it on thick, but it's good stuff and it holds up well. It's easy to touch up. Cover is really nice. First coat, nice and thin. I don't think I need to teach you guys how to paint, but some people should be nowhere near paint because they just suck at it. I'm gonna finish this up. Do a few coats, let it dry in between. Time to pull the control arms off on both sides and then the winch and the winch plate. If you look there was so much slop in the front splines in the axles that they rubbed against the A-arm there, as well as rubbed a little bit of a notch into the frame there. On this side, didn't really contact the frame much, but definitely also rubbed into the A-arm there. Yeah, this thing was getting real sloppy. I mean, that's a big issue with these. I failed because the last time I rebuilt these, I should have changed the input splines, or in this sense, technically the output splines out of the diff, the female end, and I didn't. So that's probably why I had so much slop, because those actually wear out. It's kind of disappointing that that part of the diff wears out, it must not be heat treated properly, or just using a low quality steel on those components. Because think about cars and stuff like that, obviously a different environment, but that part doesn't usually wear out. So either that or the axles are much harder because of the heat treat that they get, and they wear out the diff rather than wear out the axle itself. But I'm just guesstimating here. I mean, this is just my hypothesis. Like, I'm not sure whether that's true or not. Feel free to chime in. The slop in the axles, in the front and the rear and the hub assemblies, is a very kind of common thing in the Polaris world, both in the splines going into or out of the transmission in the rear and out of the front diff in the front. You'll see a lot of RZRs have a ton of play and slop there, which isn't good. Okay, so I've never had the front A-arms off with the clip off. I'm mind blown right now. Look at this. I guess according to Polaris, this is the way you mount the upper A-arms. It's literally this stamped plate that literally just is held by these two bolts that are holding the A-arms into the chassis here. I mean, here too, for the fairlead, but like if you don't have those bolts in for some reason, or if like you're not running a winch, then maybe the bumper bolts hold it. But if you're not running a bumper to reinforce all this, essentially you've just got these two bolts holding that. I don't understand why. I don't know if it's like so you can replace it when you shear it off, which you kind of surprised I haven't. Yeah, new to me. Leave a comment if you know why the hell they do that. It just seems odd to me. I don't know if it's so you can line stuff up better or if things get tweaked. It makes me think that this should be tougher and maybe, I don't know, part of the chassis or welded to the chassis, at least spot welded to the chassis. But there might be a method to the madness I don't know about. I'm not a chassis builder. As I mentioned earlier, I have a lower gusset plate on here. You can see it's gusseted here. Extra plate from Dragonfire Racing. I highly recommend that, especially running aftermarket A-arms, so that you don't shear the lower A-arm mounting locations with the stronger A-arm. The A-arm won't give, the chassis usually will. I know Super ATV also makes that part now, and I'm sure a bunch of other companies make that gusset kit. But I really think it's a good idea. And then the Kaufman bracket there, the adapter bracket, also reinforces the upper mount. At least the front one, I believe. So that's cool. Last thing you want to do is shear those out of the chassis. So this side is out. We'll just do the same to the other side. And then we're pretty much through the thick of it after the winch comes out. Got the A-arms off now. I had to remove an additional piece of my skid plate from the front there, just so I have a little bit easier access to some of the hardware and the gusset plate so I can pull it off. And then this gusset plate basically just sits on here and gets sandwiched by the bolts. It's not coming off now because it's squished in there. I'll show you. That's it. Basically, it's just a piece of stamped metal, but it doubles the thickness of these mounting locations here, and it kind of acts as a bit of a skid plate too. I've still got an additional skid over it. There we go. Now we got access to the 4 mounting bolts on the OEM diff here, which is such a stupid design because it basically mounts from the bottom there and it just goes into the cast aluminum. There's no helicoils or inserts in there or anything. It's just a hardened metal bolt into cast aluminum. Just asking for trouble. I'm surprised I haven't sheared that out. I know that's a common failure. People land hard or hit something hard and it basically strips out the bolts in the bottom of the case there, and the diff moves, and then usually that movement is enough to misalign it and just grenade it all and just shatter the case and just end your day in a really, really expensive fashion. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pull these tie rods off, and then we'll get the winch and the winch plate out. The winch plate on these machines acts as a really nice gusset for the frame here, but this is going to act as an even nicer gusset for the frame. Installing this setup actually adds a lot of rigidity to the front end here. You don't need to remove the tie rods if you're not doing anything with that. You'll need to remove the pin that holds your drive shaft in. I've got a Rhino drive shaft from Super ATV, but the OEM drive shaft will be the same. If you have an OEM style roll pin in there, then you're gonna have to hammer it out with a punch. And it sucks. It usually sucks. You gotta hit it so hard, you think the diff is gonna break. So yeah, it sucks. I always opt to use a bolt with a nut on it, and I just slap a little bit of Loctite on the nut. But this is sufficient. It's a lot easier to get out. It's a lot easier to get in, and it does the job just the same way. So just use a good quality bolt instead of the roll pin if you choose to do so. Now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna loosen all the bolts underneath the diff. There's 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm gonna remove my winch and my winch plate. Before I remove the winch and the winch plate, I'm gonna drain the cooling system, the intercooler and the rad. And I'm gonna get those out of the way because it'll make getting in there a lot easier, and it's gotta come out anyways, so might as well make my life a little bit easier. Usually when you're pulling the winch and the winch plate and that, it's a real pain in the ass because all these lines are in the way. There's a lot going on, especially on a turbo model here, because you've got the intercooler in addition to the rad. So it's always a pain in the butt, but having all this out of the way will make it easy. Let's drain this puppy. Now keep in mind, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. There's no specific order you have to go about doing this. There's no method to my madness. I've never done this before. So there might be a more logical way of doing some of this stuff. My goal here is to show you what needs to be done. The steps you choose to take, the steps you choose to skip, they're up to you. So just keep that in mind. This isn't supposed to be the fastest or the best way to do this. It's just supposed to be an in-depth of how to do it. I have never changed this rad fluid, which is not good. I probably should have changed it quite a while ago, but I haven't. Whoa, geyser. Gonna drip out now, and then we'll do the other side as well. And we'll also check and make sure the reservoir is empty. Now we can go ahead and do this side. And one more up here. Always twist the hose first to break the seal. That's the trick if you haven't done many of these. This one shouldn't have much in it. Okay, that should be the majority of the coolant that's trapped up in here. I'm sure we'll get a bit more spillage, but that's most of it. Obviously, I don't need to tell you this. You should dispose of all your used fluids in an appropriate way. I'll go ahead and pull the rads out now. It should be pretty easy. This guy just literally sits in there. Pretty much lift him out. The vent line up on top there. This one might lift out first. Oh, the fan's still attached. Okay, with the machine lowered, it's easier to see what's going on here. That fan is still in there. I don't really think it's attached to anything except an electrical connection, which, if I recall, is jammed up under the reservoir. And then we should be able to lift that out. So these brackets here, they just pull off. You wiggle them off. And now the last thing to disconnect, I believe, is the fan wiring. I'm gonna see if I can get it out without disconnecting it, or at least move it so that I can get to disconnecting it easier. Oh, I'm making a mess. So much for that. Did really well till now. Got about half of it in the bucket, but it keeps coming. I'm still attached here. The fan. The fan wiring goes under the reservoir there. Let's see if I can get to it. Can't really get to it very easily. Well, I guess I'm just gonna pull the reservoir at this point. It's easy to get to now. There's one bolt here, one bolt there, they're Torx. So I undid the reservoir. It's a pain to get out because the coolant lines run to the bottom of it, but it gave me enough wiggle room to kind of get to this connector so that I can unplug it now. And oh my God, the radiators are so dirty from behind. freaky. Okay, that's out. Let's take these outside and take a look at them. I think we need to do a little bit of a offshoot into the rad department. Boy, does that look different with everything out. She is stripped down. I've never had the front end this apart yet on this machine. A nice worn axon in there. So we all know it's important to keep your rad and your intercooler clean, intercooler if you have one. And a lot of us will spend a good 5-10 minutes rinsing out our rads after rides, especially dirty ones, and paying special attention to cleaning them. I know I'm like that. I'll spray the hose on it for 5 minutes, then I'll pressure wash it, I'll soak it, I'll pressure wash it again, thinking I did a pretty good job, thinking I did 80%. And then you see this. Look at that. That's the bottom section of the intercooler, where I know you can't really get to. And that's the bottom portion of the rad, and it doesn't look too bad, does it? Until you flip it over. Oh my God, there's no airflow going through there. That intercooler is, I'd argue, about 50% plugged up. And that's with me trying to do my best to wash it from the front and the back and trying to get in there, but you just can't, because that is in between this rad. It's really hard to do that. Now, you think that's bad? Look at this. Oh my God. The fan traps all this, and even if you try to spray water up there with the pressure washer, you can't really get through the bracketry. Let's pull that fan off and get a better look at it. That's nasty. The only way to really clean this is to pull it all apart, but pulling it all apart is a nasty job. So you know how many people must be out there that are even, I mean, I'm OCD when it comes to cleaning stuff like that. I know there's a lot of people that ignore this even more. I can't even picture how bad their rads must be, especially if you're a mudder. Disgusting. Look at under the fan. That's 5 years of buildup. I'm doing my best to clean it. I've never had the rad out. I'm really lucky and happy actually right now that this job required removal of the rad, because this needs some love. And even with this cloggage, I've not had any heat issues, even when I'm ripping pretty quick. If you're doing this diff swap, clean your rads really good. This is your opportunity. You gotta take them out. You might as well take advantage of it. That's my public service announcement. Your razor will thank you for that, for sure. And I mean, hey, maybe you'll unlock a pony or two. All right, so we'll do a before. This is the rear of the intercooler and the rad. Front. And let's wash this baby up, or these babies up, and see how they look after. Nothing fancy going on here, just some warm water. Soak them and go to town. See that? It's going right through. See that? It's still plugged. You can see the mud ripping out of there. Just pouring out still. Starting to go through the other side a little bit, but not much. Watch. Clean. Not so clean. So this is gonna take a while. I'm sure you don't want to watch this. Look at those. The rads are cleaned out fins wise, but look how stained they are. No problem. Hit them with some aluminum wheel cleaner and a Scotch pad. Let it sit for a bit. This has been sitting on there for about 5 minutes. Look at that. Good as new. I did the top here. I like the Eagle One cleaner. I've been using it for years. You don't have to work hard. Work smart. Look at those radiators. Intercooler and rad. Oh, they're silver again. I mean, I didn't put much effort into it. You could probably make them look new, but how long is that going to last? I wiped down the fan a bit too, but once again, you're not really going to see that. So not going to waste too much time because it's just going to get caked again. The important part is you can see through the rad everywhere again. That's the best way to tell if it's clogged. See the light shining through everywhere. No more clogs in there. We're back to like 98% efficiency. Same with the radiator. That was the intercooler. Same thing here. You can see even in the bottom now. This is the bottom. You can see the lights shining through everywhere. That rad is nice and clean now. Way better than it was. Now we're going to remove the lower rad support here. This is one of the last things we've got to remove. I've pretty much exposed the winch to make it super easy to get to and remove, which is really nice. So we'll pull the winch and the winch mount next, or the winch plate, and then we can pull that diff finally. Once we pull the diff, that's when the fun begins. Okay, unbolted the winch from the winch plate, pulled the hook off and everything so I can get it out. Fair leads off, and we can pull the winch out. Oh, if only it was always this easy. Obviously, you've got to disconnect the wiring too, so I got to cut some zip ties. But yeah, the winch is ready to come out, so I'm going to pull the winch. Then the last thing is the winch plate. All right, winch is out. All the hardware is out. Time to remove the winch plate. There we go. It's diff time. Let's get that diff out of there. Let's get a shot of that first. Oh yeah, there she is. There's that diff. The cute little diff. Can't wait to get the new one in there. And then I'm done for the night, and we're gonna pick up next day. I wanna hit this part with a fresh mind, rested, so that I don't mess nothing up. This part is easy, just tearing everything apart, and then putting it all back together shouldn't be too hard either once the diff is in place. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah, baby. All right, let's get these 4 bolts out from under here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that diff should lift out of there. We'll slide the shaft off of it. It's already undone. Once this diff's unbolted, we'll have enough movement to be able to move that around and slide the shaft off, I believe. No. Do I have to remove the hanger bearing? I do, don't I? Damn it. Always something. So I think I forgot that I need to remove the hanger bearing as well. I've got a billet aluminum solid mount hanger bearing. Next step will be pull the front diff out with the 4 bolts, slide that shaft off after we unbolt the hanger bearing, get the diff out. Hope you guys are finding the video informative and enjoyable. I'm hoping I don't miss too many steps. Like I said, this is really step by step so that anyone can do it, even if it's their first time and they don't have too many mechanical skills. You don't need too many fancy tools to tear these razors apart. They really are a pleasure to work on. They're very well thought out in that sense. Tearing them down is really easy. You don't need a hoist by any means. A couple jack stands will do you. So yeah, smash that like button if you're finding this video helpful and enjoyable. And also, don't forget to subscribe, because all that stuff really helps bring more content your way, motivate me to make more. Unplug the electrical connector from the diff, obviously. Vent line is up here, so just get that out of the way. And then let's see if we can get this diff out without disconnecting the prop shaft. Oh, never mind. I was wrong. Let's hope we can get the new diff in, because I really don't feel like disassembling the center console to get to the hanger bearing and stuff. Alrighty, there we go. A lot of crud in there, a lot of mud trapped in there. The diff is out. Mission accomplished. I'm gonna clean all this stuff up. I'm gonna get all this cooked on dirty mud off the frame here. Like I said earlier, we're going at this OCD. I like working on clean surfaces. For the extra 10 minutes it takes me to clean this, you can see all the crap in there. All the muddy, oily crud that hides under the diff. I said we'll clean all this crap off here. I'm just gonna hit it with some penetrating lube, like some WD-40 or something, and wipe it down. It cuts through the grime really good. And then we'll have a good picture of what's going on here so that we can work on a nice clean surface. Let's do a side-by-side comparison on the bench. Instructions. They sent me a paper copy, full color. Goes over everything, I would say, quite in detail, quite well. Pretty clear pictures of what you need to trim before and after, so that's nice. Not that much goes into this really outside of the disassembly and reassembly. The trimming, all that stuff, it's pretty minor. You should be able to follow these directions very easily. They're more than adequate. Now those directions mated with this video shouldn't have any issues at all accomplishing this, guys. Whether you pick away at it over a few days like I am, or you just start on it one morning and just basically cram it all into a day, which you can easily do if you're hustling. I cleaned up some of these areas here. They're nice and black now. They look pretty good. The hoses look a heck of a lot better. Just hit them with some WD-40, let it soak, and then just a microfiber, rubbing it down a few times. It's just cooked on dirt, right? So it comes off pretty good. In here, you can see I've cleaned out most of the crud. It's still pretty dirty in there though. So I'm gonna hit it with some brake clean just to get rid of some of that gunk. So I have a nicer, cleaner area to work with. We'll just finish cleaning up in here, and then we'll get ready to mark out all the areas that we need to trim out. Let's hit this guy with some brake clean. All right, let that dry, and I'll blow it out with some compressed air. We're ready. Got my lights set up. We're all clean in there. You can see I've cleaned out this whole section. It's as clean as we need it. All the dirt and debris is out of there. And now we're gonna mark off our areas to trim. We'll be trimming here, kind of like that. We'll be shaving down this bolt head. And we'll be trimming this area here, kind of along here, cutting all that out, including what's underneath there, our original mount locations for our diff. Once you do this, you're not putting the stock diff back in. I mean, I'm assuming you know that, and I don't know why you would want to, but just so you know. This whole section's coming out here too, with that front cut. We also need to notch the lower rad/intercooler support here. I think it gets cut out here. So what I'll do is I'll go through the instructions. I'll mark this out in paint marker, and then we'll go over it one more time in detail before we make any cuts. Let's see if we can mark this up. Got the instructions here. Let's see if we can duplicate it. To me, it looks like it follows this contour line down to there. That's close. Here, like that. So this is what we're cutting. That's what we're getting rid of from here. So we'll start with that, and then we can always take a little bit more off if we need to. Now we'll mark the inside section. So we gotta trim this part here. Like that. That section's gotta come out. And with this coming out here, it's also gonna transfer over into this piece here. This one we seem to kind of follow the contour of the radius here. Now taking off a little bit more, a little less there, I don't think is an issue as well. So we'll start by getting rid of that, and then we'll fit and see if we need to clean it up a little bit more. Last part is this lower rad support section here. This one's a little tricky to see on the pictures. Basically goes here. And here. We're cutting this out. And then we're gonna round all these corners. We're gonna round all the sharp edges. Put a nice radius on all of them. I believe that's really all the trimming we need to do. You know, people here, I gotta cut the frame, and they freak. There's not that much going on here, guys. You can relax. Plate that I painted up, it goes on the front of the machine. We'll show you that in a bit. Instructions, use them, follow them. This video is gonna show you better than the instructions because you're gonna see everything in high definition as we go. Pay attention, take your time. If you're not a very experienced or frequent fabricator, I've fabricated a lot of stuff. I've built various cars and done a bunch of kind of farmy around the house stuff for years. I've always been kind of a jack of all trades. I'm far from a professional fabricator, but by no means am I worried about this. People here, you gotta modify the frame, you gotta cut the frame, and they freak. This is about as minor as frame modification goes. You're not actually cutting anything structural here. You're actually probably gonna add rigidity over what you take away. Once that bracket's bolted in and everything, you're actually probably gonna strengthen this section of frame. It's amazing how easily this diff retrofits in here actually. It's wonderful. Driveline angles, everything stays the same. Suspension mounting points, it's great. So don't let that frame modification part freak you out. Have fun with it. When you own these machines, they are maintenance intensive, but if you maintain them intensely, you have an intense amount of fun and reliability out of them. It's all part and parcel. Ride hard, maintain hard. I preach that all the time. So enjoy this. It's part of the experience. Do I like wrenching as much as I like riding? Hell no. I used to like wrenching a lot more than I do. But you know what? At the end of the day, when your machine's bulletproof on the trail, you know every nut and bolt on it. You know every sound it makes. You know how to fix any problem that comes your way, even on the trail. It makes you happy. It makes you look like a badass out there. And at the end of the day, you're having fun. I've cut that section out first, which I figured would give me better access to the section under here, so I was right, because it's hard to get in from the other side. I don't have anything really small. I don't have a plasma cutter on hand, but that's looking like it's a similar sized hole to what it should be. I'm gonna undercut it there, do a cut there, and then maybe I can squeeze in there and do a cut as well. And then that should take out the section I need there, and then anything that looks ugly, I'll finish it off with a burr bit. It'll make easy work of this mild steel. It sucks trying to get in here with something this big. If you have something smaller, that would be beneficial. I got a small die grinder. I just don't have any thin discs for it, and it's twice as thick as this one. It's a pain in the butt, and it's just like a crappy Harbor Freight die grinder, so it takes a while. So I'm trying to make most of my big cuts with this nice big electric angle grinder, and then I'll finish it off with this. I forgot to mention that you have to cut out the back section of the fair lead there, so I'll mark that and show you guys that in a second. So you can see here, I pretty much want to cut it with the top there along the frame rail. That's going to be a pain in the ass to get in there. The best tool for this is by far a handheld plasma cutter, but I don't have access to one of those right now. A Sawzall might actually be better for that. So if you have a Sawzall with that, I'm gonna go try and track mine down. The question is, do I have a good metal blade? Man, because those Harbor Freight metal blades are terrible. They're good for wood and stuff, but like you gotta use the name brand blades for metal, and I don't know if I have any left. I got my trusty reciprocating saw, and we'll try and go at it, see if I can get in there with the reciprocating saw. It's just a matter of getting the tools you have in there, however you need to get them in there. All right, so next we're gonna cut out the part on the steering rack. All right, we got this part out. Now we'll just have to clean up those edges a little bit. Take just a little bit more off here to round it off. That was one of the easier cuts, I'd say, to get into and to do. I'm almost finished off this one here. I just got to figure out a way to get in there. I might drill some holes and get the Sawzall in there actually. Going well though, going well. Just taking my time. So I don't claim to be an expert or anything, but if you take your time on this, it's not that bad of a job really. You just got to kind of think your way through it. I really feel pretty much anyone can accomplish this if they really want to and they follow along, following all the steps. I'm gonna cut into here and then I'm gonna finish off the corners with the Sawzall. Okay, that went quite well. Finish it off with the Sawzall here. A nice chunk right there. I think I need to burr down those sections there, so I'm gonna start cleaning these up. I'll start off with the flap disc. I'll move into a burr bit if I need to. First, we'll do our last cut, which is gonna be a pain to get to. It's this one up here. Gotta cut out that fair lead piece from the behind. You leave the front one intact. Don't know how I'll be able to show you guys that. I'll do my best. Managed to get in here with the Sawzall upside down on an angle. I think I can make a good chunk of the cut like this. See if we can do the other side the same way. Got the first chunk out. That's double thick because that's where the fair lead mounts. So there's quite a bit of strain on this from winching. So it's a little tougher to cut. I'm gonna run one more cut around the top here. I'll show you up top here. Flap disc time. Nice new flap disc. It cuts through metal pretty good. As you probably know, if you've used the flap disc, I freaking love these things. And luckily I can kind of get into where I need to and just finish up grinding down what's overhanging. I already did the rad support. I rounded it off really nice. I already did the steering rack section. So I'll show you this when it's all done. I just want to show you how I'm getting into these spots so that you have an idea of what kind of tools to use and how to get in there, because I know sometimes when I'm working on a job like this, I'll be watching someone, like they've cut out the holes and they don't show you how you do it. I'm like, how the hell did you get that tool in there? Well, this is how. So you catch the drift. Same goes for the other side. Clean everything off, round it off, get rid of all the sharp, rough edges, radius everything, and pretty much when you were done all this, we'll just go over it once again and we'll do a test fit. All right, coming back at you. Look at that progress, guys. Yep, that's an RS1 diff in a 2017 RZR Turbo, RS1/Turbo S diff if you want to get technical. She feels at home in there. I got it in through the driver's side. The side is the best way to get it in there. I'm gonna show you how, because it's annoying. Like, you gotta basically jigsaw it in there. It was a real pain in the butt, but I think now that I've done it, once I pull it out, that'll be fun too. I haven't pulled it out yet. Once I get it out of there, we'll put it back in on camera so you can see a bit of the struggle, and maybe it'll help you know which way to access it or what you need to remove, because like I said earlier, you don't need to strip down as far as I'm stripping down. With that being said, one little spot down here I need to still trim. You'll see I cut out this section here like they recommended. In the pictures on the installation instructions, you can't really see very clearly whether they leave this kind of folded up section. I really wanted to minimize cutting out as much as I could. If you notice here, I just got to take down a little bit more of it just to make sure that diff clears completely. And I think essentially that will make for for a pretty nice fit. Everything snugs up. It sits in the frame really well. It's actually pretty impressive that a diff like this that wasn't really intended for this vehicle fits in there. Okay, so that's in there now. The worst part is done. I mean, that's awesome. Now I'm gonna pull this out. I'll show you everything I trimmed in detail. I'll show you the sections I left in and the sections I chose to take out and why. And I'll give you a really nice clear image of that, because I really feel that's kind of the most important part, is to see what you need to remove to get this thing to fit in there. I'm noticing there's gonna be some other issues. Obviously, when there's aftermarket accessories involved, there's so many variances and so many different ways and options for accessories and companies and styles that it makes it hard to do a kit that fits everything. So the way my Super ATV bumper mounts, especially tying into my EXO cage and into the frame rails here, with the original winch mount being up here for the RZR, in a 1000 XP, if you're doing this conversion, there's a lot more room up here because you don't have an intercooler. With the intercooler and the rad thing up here and all the hoses, the extra hoses, you really run into a lot of kind of issues here. Even with just the stock diff and the winch up there, it's really tight in a terrible spot. So I'm gonna relocate my winch somewhere to the front of my bumper here, which in my mind means that I also have to reinforce the mounting locations of the bumper to the chassis, because it's not designed for a winch location. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reinforce my mounting locations, which will require me to modify my bumper a bit and do a little bit of welding. I've got these heavy duty Allen heads, and I'm gonna make this hole slightly bigger to fit this bigger hardware. And then I'm gonna take my nut and I'm actually gonna weld it on the back here, because it's so annoying getting this bumper on and off and trying to fish your fingers in there to get that nut on and off, especially with this bigger diff. I figure got everything apart. I'll weld a nut to the back here for both of these. They say you can just leave this plate bolted in with those 2 bolts. In my books, that's really not that tough. When you start changing things and modifying things to this level, don't expect things to be bolt-on. Don't expect things to be plug and play. This is bolt-on for the most part. As bolt-on as a custom fab kind of part goes, but every machine will require some unique tweaks. If you've hit something with your front end, if you race, if you smacked a tree and your frame is tweaked, I mean, it doesn't have to be destroyed or really bent up, but if it's tweaked even a little bit, then these brackets might not line up. Like when you put all this in there, it might not line up, might be tweaked. You might have to tug on that frame. You might have to grind down a bracket. You might have to use a hammer to get something in that otherwise would just slip in. So keep that in mind when you're taking on a task like this. And I mean, I'm well equipped. I've got welders and all the tools that I need. By no means, like I said earlier, I'm not like a full out fab shop, but I can deal with these issues. I have the skill set and the tooling required. If you don't, then be prepared to take a few trips to the store and get some new tools, or borrow some tools, or whatever you need to do, or ask a friend for help, or use someone else's shop. Or worst case scenario, if you watch this video and at the end of the day you feel you're not 100% sure about this, then you know what, just pay a shop that's reputable to do this install for you, rather than causing more collateral damage and really tweaking stuff and messing stuff up, or getting all this done and then figuring out you did something wrong and you have to take it all apart again and get a shop to do it anyways, because it always costs a lot more to fix a mistake than to just prevent it. So that's that. I just wanted to kind of give you that. We'll pull this diff out. I'll film that part, and then we'll film putting it back in after I trim up a little bit here. And if you're doing a mod like this, that means you like to push the limit anyways. So I mean, I think you've already accepted all the other things that go with doing modifications like this to your machine if you've committed to this. This is a wicked kit so far. The way everything's laid out, the way it looks like it's gonna fit up and all that, I think it's gonna be really nice. The attention to detail is there, the quality is there. I'm really happy with it. It's far from cheap, but you're getting what you pay for here. I hope you guys can see here. We're gonna try and wiggle this diff out of here. It's my first time taking it out. I'm just gonna get as much as I can out of the way here, hose-wise. When I put it in, I kind of wiggled it in here, kept the bottom of the diff below this. So let's see if we can get this guy out. Yep, progress. Oh, yeah, not bad, eh? So that's the way to do it. And putting it in is just the opposite. Wow, What a massive difference, both in size and weight. Obviously the stock diff on the right, the RS1 diff on the left. Look at that case difference. Look at the mounting locations difference. The RS1 diff mounts from the top. The stock diff mounts from the bottom. The hardware included or on the RS1 diff is huge, and the mounting locations plus its bushing. The mounting on the OEM diff is it's laugh worthy. I mean, it's a joke. Look at that size difference. Look how sturdy and reinforced everything is here in comparison. Look at those stock mounting locations. What a joke. That's how you'd see it in the machine, facing towards the back of the machine. Drain hole. I did check. It does not line up. Not at all. There's no way you're getting that drain plug out. I have marked the location here where you got to make that drain hole bigger. Here you're seeing the areas that we've cut. We've cut and trimmed out the box here like they tell you to. Pay attention to how much space is left here. It's kind of in the middle of that radius, the factory radius here. You have to trim the, let's call it the rad support here. Just flush with this section here without removing the meat behind here. Hope you can see that okay. You don't want to remove that section. That's double thick from the original Fairleigh location where you took out. I feel it adds quite a bit of rigidity there as a good connector. You don't want to cut all that out. I feel it's going overkill. These sections here, it's also double thick there. It's an AR mount. Did the same on this side. You can see the stock Fairleigh would go here. So we've cut all that out. That was the hardest cut out of everything with the tools I had. Just getting in there, and then I ended up using a flap disc to get all those lines cleaned up. We took the, it says take the 90 degree off here, the sharp corner. So essentially I've just tapered it down to like a 45, and I took a little bit of extra meat off it here. So that was pretty easy. This part was easy too. I cleaned up the steering rack bracket here. I took off as much as I could here. This part's important because it's what lets you get the diff kind of lifted and in position here. You wouldn't be able to do it with that bottom section. And truth being said, you're just holding the rack here. It's in quite a solid location. Removing that little piece isn't really going to cause any harm. They tell you to shave this bolt down. Online, I saw people shaving all of them down. I just shaved them all down. It's not going to cause any harm. And then in the future, if I need to remove it or whatever, all the bolts are the same. But the rack was replaced not that long ago, so I'm hoping it'll hold together and be good for quite a while. I don't want to dig back in here. I think that's it. We're just going to do that drain plug now, and I'll quickly show you that once it's done. I cleaned everything up here because there's some flakiness and some rust, and I'll be doing some welding, so I'll probably clean it up a bit more too. Good time to inspect all your AR mounts. Make sure everything's true and straight. Make sure nothing's tweaked. Check around here if you've taken big hits. Make sure none of there's no, if the paint's cracked off and peeling off in areas, sometimes it's a sign of like a stress fracture or a crack. Make sure there's no cracks in the frame or on any of the welds here. Mine all look good after inspecting it. And because if there is something there, now's the time to address it and make sure everything's okay. Odds are if you're putting an RS1 diff in there, it's not because you want to lay back and cruise. It's probably because you want to send it harder. So there will be a lot more stress and abuse going through this chassis now with that strong diff in there. You're shifting the weakest link. Essentially on a machine like this, where the driveline is fully built, aside from the stock diff naturally becomes the Achilles heel and the weakest link. Well, putting that RS1 diff probably shifts the weakest link to what I'm hoping, I really hope it shifts it to the prop shaft. I hope I break yokes or U-joints rather than breaking trannies. Like I said earlier, we have to shift the drain hole over a little bit. So what I did is I drilled a pilot hole kind of in the middle of it, and then I'm just going to use a step bit to drill it. And then if it's not big enough, I don't have a big enough step drill bit, so I'll just use a bore bit or something and make it a little bigger. And then we'll double check it once the diff is in place to make sure it's adequate. Now that I've drilled a pilot hole, I can come in from the top with the step drill. It'll be easier. All right, so we're through there. I need to get myself a nice bigger step drill, but that's pretty close. Pretty much we're gonna try and go like this. There we go. Now we can just even that out with a burr bit. Final look at the drain plug. It looks kind of like a skull or an alien head now. That should be fine. I will double check it one more time with the diff in. Hopefully I don't have to pull it out and do it anymore. You can see it from the bottom there. I want to be able to maintain this differential as good as I can. They don't use a lot of fluid, and the fluid's not expensive, so it makes sense to change it frequently. At least every oil change, I would say. It takes a few minutes. We're finally at the stage where we can put the diff in there and fit the bracket and see how everything lines up. Hope you guys are following along okay. Hope it's in depth enough. Hope it's not too chatty. But you can always skip through the sections you don't need to see. I know these last couple sections here with what you cut out are probably the most important for most viewers. And if you do enjoy it, it takes a lot of time to do these videos. It takes about 3 times as long probably to do this whole job, stopping constantly to film all the steps in between, and then I have to sit down and edit it all and go through it and spend quite a few hours doing that. So do slap that thumbs up button, smash that guys. The thumbs up really help, and please subscribe if you found the video helpful. Okay, I want to test fit the diff one last time just to make sure the drain plug and everything is 100%. Then we'll pull it out. I'll paint all this, make it look nice and fresh. And then the next step after that is going to be to start installing the differential and getting that plate in place. And after that will be strictly reassembly and the nightmare of trying to refit my front bumper and relocate my winch. But that's not part of the diff conversion, that's my problem. Pretty sure everything is trimmed out, fabbed up like it needs to be to get the diff in there. The diff fits. I painted everything that I ground down, except for this front section here, because I'm still trying to figure out what's going on with that in regards to getting my bumper and exo cage fitted, as well as my skid plate. I've got a gusset plate under here, and then I have this aluminum plate that I run over top of that. So it's almost like a double skid in the front. The front section here sustains some serious impacts from time to time, so I want to keep it well protected. Let me show you what I'm thinking here. Depending on what type of bumper setup you've got, what kind of accessories you've got, how you use your machine, parts of this may or may not be relevant to you. Here is the skid plate they sent you with the adapter. So it says you can either bolt it in here, or if you choose, you can weld it. Originally, I'm like, I'm gonna weld it, but then I looked at it and it's pretty thick, and it would cause some issues with my bumper sitting flush on there. It would cause issues with my aluminum skid plate portion fitting. Goes over top of the gusset, so you can see the red gusset plate. I just painted it fresh. So it overlays here on all the AR mounting tabs on the bottom. I really recommend this piece. I think it adds a lot. It's cheap and easy to install. So if we take this is kind of where they would want it from Kaufman. They want you to mount it there. As you can see, my gusset plate is interfering with that. So I drew 2 lines there. If I trim that area out of the gusset plate, this will fit nice and flush in there. So it covers that cutout and it protects the front of the diff from impacts, but it poses an issue with my bumper mounting and my lower skid mounting. This gusset plate also adds some smack protection here. And now when I add on this thick plate of aluminum, it goes on and covers here with the bumper plate mounting there. I'm also adding quite a bit of protection. If you pay attention, I've had this skid on for quite a few years. There's no impact in that area. So I'm really not overly concerned about sustaining damage to the diff from an impact up here. If that caves in, I've got bigger issues. I've probably hit something significant, and I haven't over the last 5 years. And I don't race the machine, I don't jump it, so I don't think like a nosedive scenario is a big issue. So what I might do is I might just ignore that plate, run my gusset, run my aluminum skid, run the bumper setup like I had, and everything should be fine. I will position the diff in there one more time and make sure for some reason it doesn't interfere with the gusset kit. I feel adding the plate here is just gonna cause a whole bunch of headaches. I'm gonna use my judgment and say I probably don't need it. If you're not running any front bumper, yeah, I recommend at least bolting it on, because it is gonna provide some sort of like deflection capabilities there. But I've literally got like the same thing going on here, tried and tested for my application. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, when you're doing mods to this extent, and you're working on a machine that's already got a ton of aftermarket accessories and modifications done to it, these aren't necessarily bolt-on kits. They're giving you everything you need to get it done. Sometimes that means a few extra parts. Sometimes that means you need to fabricate a few extra parts. So let's take a look. All fresh, semi-gloss black in there. Everything's looking nice, all painted up. So all I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna weld the 2 nuts into these holes here, so that I can have an easier job mounting my bumper and removing my bumper in the future. So I'll weld those in, we'll hit it with another coat of paint, and then we'll do hopefully our final test fit, just to make sure it clears the gusset plate and all that. And if it does, I don't have to pull the diff again. We can go ahead and we can start mounting our adapter plate. Okay, I've welded 2 nuts behind both these holes. I still got the bolt in there because it's hot. You can see 2 nuts. That'll make mounting my bumper a lot easier. Time to slap a bit more paint on there while it's nice and hot. Nothing helps paint dry like welding. We are ready to put the diff in. We touched a little bit earlier about fluid choice. Here I have the recommended fluid for this diff, and probably the best fluid to run in your Polaris RZR front differential. If you don't know much about the front diffs, we'll just keep it basic. It's a Hilliard styled front differential design, and John Deere, a lot of their tractors run that specific differential style and have been for a long time. The high guard, low viscosity John Deere fluid is considered better by many than the DDF fluid from Polaris, the demand drive fluid. This is the Polaris demand drive fluid. This is the OEM fluid in your diff, also very watery. Similar sound, viscosity wise there. I talked to Joe Kaufman. He says this is what he runs in the diffs. This is what he recommends running on the diffs. Did a bunch of research online, and you guys probably all know that trying to research fluids and asking for opinions on lubricants and fluids online or anywhere is like, dude, everyone and their grandma has a different opinion and a different story to tell about how this one's good and this one's bad, how this one messed this up and this one didn't. Kind of analyze what I've read, and it kind of points towards this, and then he tells me that this is what he runs. I feel pretty confident that this is the fluid we should be using. So this is what's going in the diff, John Deere High Guard. While we're on the topic of fluids quickly, the transmission in this machine runs the Polaris AGL. It's like that purple fluid, kind of looks like royal purple, quite watery as well. I did a lot of research online. I read a lot on Bob the Oil Guy and a bunch of other forums, and tried to kind of analyze the responses to the more educated, kind of more analytical responses that had some sort of evidence and science backing them. And I found that the 7585 Redline gear oil is probably the best oil to run the tranny on this machine. So that's what I'll be putting in instead of the AGL. We got a brand new tranny in there. It's only got a few hundred kilometers on it. It's got the OEM AGL in it now, so it's ready to drain for its first change anyways, and we'll be replacing it with this and running this. I've had a ton of luck with Redline manual transmission fluids in my race cars in the past, so I feel really confident putting this into the RZR. We're gonna proceed with filling up the front differential now, since it comes shipped without fluid, obviously. So we'll fill that baby up, and then we'll get it mounted and fitted in here, and then we'll test fit the adapter bracket finally, and hopefully start towards the path of reassembly with the new diff. I mean, this is the exciting part. Everything's ready, everything's trimmed, everything's dry for the paint. The test fits are done. It looks like everything's going where it should. And now the conversion aspect starts. Leave a comment below. Let us know what you use for fluid, why you use it, what kind of experiences you've had. Do you use the high guard? Do you use the demand drive? Do you use something else? There's a lot of debate on people running all sorts of different fluids in the tranny and in the front diffs. So leave a comment below. It's a good topic to discuss. And like I mentioned before, if you have any other questions or feedback or tips or tricks on this job, then also feel free to leave a comment and add into the discussion, because that's where a lot of the value out of these videos is added. It's in the discussion in the comment section where people can kind of ask questions. If there's a question there that you know the answer to, feel free to answer it. That stuff's very helpful, and it adds a lot of depth to the video itself. One final look here at everything. All the paint is dry, all the trimming, all the cutting is complete. Everything looks really nice now. Let's fill this puppy up with the high guard, and let's get it into the RZR and get the adapter bracket fitted. So according to the Turbo S maintenance manual, you have to put 250 milliliters of fluid into the front diff on a Turbo S or an RS1. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do that. I like to fill it to basically the bottom threads of the fill plug here. So if that's a little more than 250 mils, that's what we're gonna go with, especially now on a new fill where the gear case is completely empty. Since we have it on the bench, fill plug's right here. If it's in the machine, then you want it on a level surface when you fill it. Drain plug, obviously, right here on the bottom. So much easier to fill on the bench here. Take advantage of that right now before we put it in. All right, so it's an 8 mil Allen head. I'm just gonna use an 80 milliliter measuring spoon. When it's in the machine, a lot of guys like to use something like a turkey baster, a fluid transfer pump, or a tube on the end of the bottle, because it can get messy and difficult to get in there. Probably about 280 mils in there now, a little over what it asks for. Now we can go ahead and put the fill plug back in there. Once it's in the machine, I will go ahead and double check that level just to make sure we're okay. But I'm pretty confident we are. Torque that up. Don't go crazy on this thing. It's got a seal. It's going into cast aluminum. She's ready to go. Okay, let's get this diff in here. Let's see if we fare any better this time. Hoping that this is the last time I gotta pull this thing in and out for a long, long time. And we'll wanna try and get it into the prop shaft there too. Let's go. Oh, pain in the ass every time. There we go. I think that's right. Let's see if we can get that. Oh, that's lined up pretty good there with the prop shaft. See if we can luck out and get it to slip in there. Oop. Oh, and I've also got to line up the pinhole for the bolt I'll be putting in there. Got to line up the roll pinhole. Obviously things would have been too easy if this just dropped right in there, right? So if you pay attention here, you can probably see the diff is not completely straight. You got a good reference mark there. It's kind of on an angle like this. it won't straighten itself out. I managed to line it up pretty nice on the prop shaft there, and the roll pin hole is on the top and on the bottom, and it is lined up into the splines like it should be. It took me a couple tries and some jiggling. Had to get my dad to kind of help me hold the prop shaft there while we jiggled the diff into place, but it will not, it's bottoming out this way. It looks like the diff needs to go forward on the machine rather than back, but the shaft isn't seating far enough, as you can see on the input there. I've got a billet aluminum hanger bearing from Super ATV, so I'm hoping, I really didn't want to undo it because it's such a pain in the ass getting the center console out and undoing the bolts and stuff like that. I was hoping it would just slip on, but now I'm hoping that there's a little bit of adjustment and play in that. I'm pretty sure there's some slotted holes on it, so I'm hoping that'll give me enough movement if I loosen it up that the shaft will kind of align itself into position where it needs to be. Basically hoping that it fits. I really don't want to be in a situation where my drive shaft is now the problem, or my prop shaft. So I'm gonna take some more stuff apart. I'm gonna pull the center console and try to get to the bolts for the prop shaft, undo the cap so I can lift the shaft, and see if I can get the roll pin in on the diff, line up the diff, and then still put the hanger bearing assembly and everything together properly without any binding or any misalignment issues. I'm guessing it should be fine. Originally I'd planned on doing that anyways, but I'm like, I saw some videos online where people weren't disconnecting that, so I figured I'd try. Now, if I had the OEM hanger bearing and the OEM prop shaft, I'd probably be fine because it's got a lot of play in the front end on the OEM hanger bearing. There's a lot of slop in that rubber hanger bearing because it's suspended in a nice chunk of rubber. There's no play in a solid bearing setup like this with the billet aluminum hanger. So yeah, let's hope that works. So we'll dig into that, and we'll see if that solves our problem here. When I do these videos, I like to show you guys these issues because these are the issues that I find a lot of other videos omit. Even you watch a lot of install videos put together by companies, piece of cake. You take it home and it's like, that doesn't fit, that doesn't line up, that bolt's broken, that bolt's seized. I can't get to that bolt without removing this bolt and removing that. I want to show you all that so you know what you're getting yourself into doing this job, or how to work your way out of the problem if you encounter it as well. Okay, look at that mess. Seats are kind of moved out of the way, center console is out. We got access to everything here now. You can see the hanger bearing there. I'm gonna undo it and hope for the best. All right, so I took a good look at the hanger bearing down here, and it looks like the main mounting bolts onto the chassis, not these guys, but the two main bolts are in slotted holes. And I think there's still a bit of adjustment available on those slots to go forward. So I'm gonna try and dig in there, get those loosened up, and see if we can pull that shaft assembly forward a bit. The rear portion, the rear half of the shaft is on a slip shaft, so it should have a bit of movement forwards. Hopefully, I mean, all we're really looking for here, I'm guessing, is somewhere into the range of about 1/4 inch. So I'm hoping we can salvage that. Okay, so I've managed to squish in there and loosen those two main mounting bolts, and I'll get a pry bar in there and see if I can move it. So we got a lot more room, a lot more movement in that front shaft assembly now. You can see the hanger bearing well from under here. You can see it's moving forward now. Was a little difficult in the instructions was it was really hard to see how much was cut out of certain areas and the way they had done it. So I've really gone out of my way to take a bunch of photos so I can provide those, because I had trouble seeing in all the other videos and in the pictures exactly how much you have to trim out and where you leave certain sections. With the frame being black on black, their lighting wasn't the greatest, hard to see. Okay, I couldn't figure out why my shaft wasn't lining up right. The angle seemed off, the distance seemed off. Without the diff actually mounted in the bracket, you don't know where it floats and sits. Since it's a top mount setup here, that differential essentially hangs there, for lack of better terms. So I would assume there has to be some sort of a little gap in between the bottom here and that diff. It doesn't sit there, it hangs. So I just placed this bracket in here for now just to mock things up. We'll go through it in detail in a minute, but I was worried. Originally I was gonna cut this all out here, and then I already had this marked off a while ago by painted over it. I'm like, I thought it was okay. I thought the diff would hang higher. Well, it's kind of hitting there. As you can see, my silver paint marker, I'm gonna have to notch that section out to give myself the clearance for this little tit that hangs off that diff. So we'll pull the diff, we'll trim it, and then we'll hit it one last time, and I think things will like really fall into place there. So have fun learning through me. I can waste my time so that hopefully you can save a bit of yours. Okay, notched out that little section there. Final test fit, I'm hoping. I think everything is trimmed out now the way it should be. It took a few tries to get it just right. Some of the pictures and the instructions were a little tough to see, even when I zoomed in on them on the computer. So I've taken a bunch of higher quality photos that I'll post on the website so that you guys can take a really good look at how you have to cut out your frame so you can get it the first time without having to put the diff in and out multiple times. I'm gonna show you exactly what you need to cut out without cutting out too much. Here is the big cut on the bottom, the main cut. You'll be able to see it better there with the piece of paper behind it. You see the notch on the bottom right there? That's important to clear the kind of nipple or the chunk that sticks out on the bottom front end of the diff. The drain plug has to be increased in size. That wasn't mentioned in the instructions. Here, we've opened up the bottom section and we've trimmed it out as far as we can until we're up against the steering rack here and here. You've got to take the head off the bolt on this bolt. I did all four just for the heck of it. You don't really need to, but you have to do that one. Here you can see the drain plug from up top. Divot out is what you need to add. This is usually a sharp 90-degree kind of piece of sheet there. That has to get shaved down, kind of beveled down on an angle for clearance. The section out of the fair lead comes out here. You'll be better able to see this on the photos. Like I said, the photos will be pasted on or posted on the website. I've welded in 2 nuts here to better mount my front bumper. You can choose to do that if you like. It's a good time to do it since you've got easy access. Here you can see the main front cut out better. What I've taken out, you can see some of that lip I've left in there, that I've taken out. We've trimmed out all this section. This is usually where 2 of the main front mounting locations are for the OEM diff. Similar to the 2 in the rear there, it mounts at 4 corners. And then we've notched out the rad or intercooler support, whatever you want to call it there. Just notched out there, but you don't take this bottom portion out. You leave this bottom section, you just notch out the top here. Realistically, you are not cutting out a ton of meat. You're making you're trimming a little bit, I would call it. You're not cutting the frame out, you're trimming some sections of the frame. Arguably, everything you take out doesn't really impact the structural rigidity of this machine whatsoever in a meaningful way. Plus, once you bolt that adapter bracket in, you will add a lot more rigidity than you've removed. Let's try and position this differential in here, hopefully for the last time before we can mount it all up. We'll get the diff in place, and then we will test fit the adapter bracket, just loosely snug up some bolts, get everything lined up, see if we can line it up with our Driveline here and get it on the prop shaft sitting properly, and see if we can get the roll pin in there like we need to. The hanger bearing on my machine is a billet fixed position hanger bearing from Super ATV, so you don't really have any movement in it like in a stock hanger bearing setup. If you're running a stock rubber hanger bearing assembly with a stock drive shaft or a stock prop shaft, you shouldn't likely have to unbolt it because you'll have enough play in that Driveline to get it on there. In my case, I wanted to unbolt it so that I can line everything up properly and I don't have any binding issues. So that's out of the way and moved over. We'll get the diff in here, which is always fun. and then we will see if we can get everything positioned in place so that we can torque her down and then reassemble this beast. The diff has been filled up with fluid. As you saw, it's got the John Deere High Guard in it, and it's ready to go in. Well, that went well. That's the best I've done so far. All right, with that extra notch that I trimmed out of the front section of the frame here, the diff seems to be sitting flush and nice and lining up well. So I think we're in the home stretch now. Let's see if we can get that prop shaft hooked up and in line properly. Once the prop shaft is on there like it should be, the rest will be pretty smooth sailing, I believe. Okay, you can see the prop shaft there. Let's see if we can get that puppy on there. I've noticed you gotta kind of tip the diff forward and up a bit to get enough room to line that guy up there. And then you wanna make sure your hole for the roll pin or the bolt you'll be using is lined up with the splines. Mine's not here, so I'll mess around with that. We'll get it tweaked and see if we can slide it into place. So just take your time with this. Make sure you get it on there nicely so you don't damage those splines somehow. Looks like it's lined up. Let's see if it slides in there now. Yep, looks lined up. I'm gonna rotate the rear tire wheels a bit in neutral just to line that prop shaft up where I want it. Okay, great news. So it looks like my prop shaft, the yoke, and the roll pin holes for the diff and the prop shaft have lined up absolutely perfectly. The shaft is far enough on the diff right now. Now the diff is just kind of sitting there. It's not really in position yet, but I think it'll work out fine. Everything looks like it's clearanced out pretty good. There's enough movement in this shaft right now to give me some flexibility in play. So I'm hoping once the diff is in position with the bracket loosely fit, that the roll pin still lines up. Conclusion here is, if you're running an OEM hanger bearing with an OEM prop shaft, or any prop shaft with an OEM hanger bearing style, like in rubber, then likely you don't have to disconnect it. If you're running a Rhino prop shaft from Super ATV with a billet hanger bearing, or something like a solid mount billet hanger bearing from Sandcraft RCR or maybe RCV or some other brands out there, then you will likely have to unbolt the hanger bearing or at least loosen it so that you can have a bit of play and movement in there. And then once you've positioned the diff and everything else, allow that drive line to kind of lay itself in place without binding, and then tighten all that up, because even a few millimeters here can put strain on the U-joints and the drive line if you try to force anything. So I highly suggest you spend a few minutes and you unbolt that prop shaft, and just make sure you follow your prop shaft from the tranny up front to make sure there's no binding, no issues with that before you bolt it all up, because the last thing you want to do is run into driveline issues associated with the prop shaft or the hanger bearing because you didn't go around and check after you switched some stuff around. Let's put that bracket on now. Let's see how everything lines up, and then we'll look at everything in detail once we kind of test fit the bracket. We'll take a look at the prop shaft again, make sure the roll pin's in place, and make sure there's no clearance issues anywhere. I've got my bracket disassembled here. I'm gonna take the plate off, and we have both sides, and we will go ahead and we will just loosely bolt these on to get the diff into place. Okay, I'm gonna start off with the driver's side billet portion, the main portion of the bracket frame here. I've taken everything off of it, including the gusset portion for the front upper A-arm, bolt of the upper A-arm, and it should just slide right in here. Perfect fit. As I mentioned before, if for some reason you've sustained a front end impact, you've hit something, you got damage to your machine, then these brackets might not plop right in there. If they do, then you know your frame's nice and true. If it's tight or it's a little tweaked, it's not the end of the world, guys. It's an off-road machine, especially depending on what you use it for. It probably won't really matter. If you have to grind something down a little bit, if you have to hammer it in there a bit or bend out a few pieces, then you do what you got to do to make it fit. Make sure that brake line's out of the way. We'll get our bolt and we'll mount it from the back there. It's a 14 mil. I'm gonna get a socket, makes it easier to get in there. Just get this back bolt started by hand, and I'm gonna thread it in probably like 2/3 of the way to get this bracket to lay in place. Then we'll do the same on the other side. We're going to do the same for this side. These brackets are threaded. They're billet aluminum. Keep in mind that billet aluminum or not, you're working with aluminum, which is a soft material, and you're putting a hardened bolt into it, so make sure you start those threads straight or you will damage the threads and cross thread it, and it'll be a solid pain in the ass. Might have to reposition your diff a bit for clearance issues. Just shift it around. It'll pull itself into a place where it needs to go once these brackets are mounted. They'll kind of self-align themselves. Okay, so I've got that back bolt loosely positioned in there about 2/3 of the way in. Now we gotta line it up here. I find a nice way to line it up is to get the A-arm gusset and then mount it into place, and then it'll line up with the front hole. You don't have to put this in tight. It's just to kind of give you a little bit of an alignment mark, a reference point right now. And that lets you line it up with the hole in the chassis here. You can see we're lined up there nicely. So now we know that bracket is in the position pretty much that it needs to be. You can put a bolt through there to hold it. Doesn't matter what you put in there, just anything to kind of hold it in place. We'll do the same to the other side. Okay, so you'll see when we push this into place, it'll tell us where our diff kind of needs to get moved. There, that looks pretty much lined up. Good enough for now. Put a bolt through there. Any bolt just to kind of hold it in place. Now, we can put the through bolt in the back there. You can see the diff's sitting a little low right now. This will help us get everything lined up. Diff's got to go to the back of the machine a bit. There we go. And then we'll get the back hole lined up. There, that's in. That section of the diff is sitting where it needs to. Now we got to get the front section in. So a little monotonous here, but I found this was a nice way to line it up. I'm going to pull this quickly and then get my through bolt in here. Diff's got to go up a bit. Okay, we'll undo the bolt on the other side. All right, let's position this guy. Line it up. There we go. That's through. We're loosely fit and our diff should be lined up. Brackets are hand tight in place. If you look in the bottom there, you probably can't see it on video, but you can probably see a bit of a light gap. The front diff is not touching the bottom, so it's hung up there. It's essentially a hanging setup here, whereas the old diff was like a sitting setup. It would sit and bolt to the bottom of the chassis. This one is a suspended setup on the bushings here. Much sturdier mount, and everything looks good. The moment of truth really is whether or not we'll be able to get that shaft on there to line up the roll pin properly. So I'm gonna rotate the rear wheel a bit to see if I can get it in a better position so we can see there. All right, so you can probably see here that I can't get my roll pin or bolt through the hole here because my shaft isn't going far enough forward. Let's mock up like the rest of the bracket. Let's see if the top plate mounts on and all that. And then essentially whatever I ended up doing with that roll pin situation won't really be dependent on the bracket here because this won't change. The diff placement here won't change. We'll have to absorb or make up for that lack of fitment in the rest of the driveline and not up front here. So I'm assuming if I had an OEM prop shaft and an OEM hanger bearing setup, this wouldn't be an issue. As you keep watching, we'll have a solution for you and a definite answer on how you should approach this. Feel free to leave comments with your opinions, thoughts, or suggestions as well. Like we left off, everything is finger tight. We'll move this connector out of the way. They also say that you should clock your vent to the back. It makes hooking the vent hose up easier. So we'll clock that like they suggest. And we will clock our vent line. And move that guy backwards like that. It's still pretty tight in there, so I just shifted it back. It's not going anywhere. And our vent line will connect to there. So it might be a good idea to connect that vent line right now. So I just popped the vent line off the old diff, pop it on here, and then put the clamp on it. Now we can probably route that vent line out through here, for example, and then send it up out of the way. Now we'll get this plate in there, and we will loosely fit the hardware. This also doubles as a winch mount plate. On RZR 1000s, you can definitely utilize it. On the turbo application, with the intercooler up front and the rad, you're very limited to space here, even with the stock diff setup. I'm gonna opt to mount my winch in a different location like we discussed earlier on the front bumper. So everything seems to be lining up okay. Just gonna go ahead and start the rest of those. Okay, now that I've started those 6 bolts just finger tight, we're gonna mount these 2 front bolts here with the sleeves. So in order to line them up, you gotta make sure everything's loose. The bracket itself needs to be loose because you got a lot of different holes lining up here. So you might have to give it a bit of a tap one way or another. So we'll see how these line up. Start with this one. I'll see how it lines up without putting the sleeve in. A little off to this side, so we'll see if we can give it a little of a love tap. Shift the whole assembly over just a touch there. That looks better. Make sure I can start it. Got a bit of paint in those threads, so I'm just gonna run this bolt in a bit just to make sure we get a nice start on it. Don't risk cross threading anything. That feels good. Let's see if we can get it in there with the sleeve. Sleeve fits in really nicely. Perfect length, you can see there. And it's not quite lined up. Let's see if we can tap it. Oh. That looks a bit better. Keeping everything loose is important. Pretty lined up. Let's see if we can get that started and it'll pull it into place. I don't want to put any extra stress on anything here. So what I'll do is I'll slide my collar up to the top and see if that gives us enough play to kind of get that bolt in there started. It's trying to grab. Let's see if we can do the other side first. Sometimes one side wants to line up better than the other, and it'll pull things into place. It's close, but not quite yet. That's pretty darn close. But it's got to be closer, I think, to... Oh! Is it gonna get started? Nope, I don't want to cross thread it. This is not a place you want to mess up your install. Since we're kind of at a stage where everything else has gone so well, you don't want to push your luck and rush it here. So I found putting a pry bar in here let me drop the plate down a little bit, and then it let me get some clearance in there so these sit under, and then I can get my bolts started and I can probably smack things into place. I found loosening the 2 back bolts here until they're about maybe halfway engaged gave me a little bit of forward movement, which is what I needed to get these collars, the sleeves, to sit flush inside the hole, not right underneath it. The collar needs to sit flush in that hole. Make sure they line up. You can't have any gap or light shining through the bottom here. It all has to butt up nicely. So what I did is I unbolted those so there's a bit of play, and I put all my weight on here, and then I started tightening these up, and I felt those collars pull into place where they needed to be. That's important. The whole point of that collar there is to carry that load, and you want it to sit nice and flush. So now these are the first bolts I've actually tightened up, because I feel they're good ones to kind of pull everything into place. And then when I tighten up those rears, they will kind of pull that bracketry and everything back into place as well. And then I can go ahead and tighten up these bolts here. That's what makes sense to me. Everything's going together great. Really well thought out kit. Really happy with how this is going together. I'm really confident about the build quality, how well thought out it is. Really satisfied. Joe got back to me via email. He said they have not run into any issues using the stock driveline, as in the stock prop shafts. And he says this issue's gotta be isolated to the variance in the Super ATV hanger bearing setup. When you modify so many things along the line, tolerances shift bit by bit. Little bit adds up to enough to cause an issue in a situation like this. Like I said earlier, if you're running all sorts of other custom stuff, these are the types of things you can expect to run into with a modification like this. I was ready for this. So we'll pull that hanger bearing. It's a pain in the ass. It's one extra step. It's probably another hour of work. I'll clean it all up. I'll show you guys how I'm going to increase the slot size, and hopefully that will give us enough play to line everything up, make everything really nice and perfect, so that we can button this bad boy up and know it's 110% so we can thrash it on the trail. And it's also a good heads up for you. A ton of people around the Super ATV billet hanger bearing, a ton of people around the Sandcraft RCR setup, which might require some sort of a similar modification. I don't know how their setup is mounted. I don't know if they were on a slotted hole or if there's not much play in it, but it's something for you to factor in when you're doing this. If you're running the OEM prop shaft, you can pretty much go ahead and ignore that step. These two torqued up. Next step, I'm gonna torque these babies up. Then I'm gonna go ahead and torque those up. Good news, the issue has improved. We're almost perfect. As I've torqued these things up, it's obviously pulled the driveline into place where it needs to be. And if we luck out, fingers crossed, maybe that hanger bearing's fine. It worked perfect with the OEM setup. Never had any issues from the hanger bearing setup from Super ATV there. Let's torque up the rest of this and see if it pulls everything into place. Okay, we're gonna torque up these two bolts. They're 14 mils, and we'll hope that that pulls that diff assembly and everything back just a little touch. One thing I wanna note when you're tightening these guys, I mentioned it before, harden bolt into an aluminum piece. There is gap between the frame and these brackets. It's pulling it all together. Make sure you tighten them evenly so that you don't put too much strain on one bolt and that everything tightens up uniformly. You don't want to risk stripping these threads in there. Tighten that one. Now I'm going to snug this one up, and I'm going to go tighten that one some more. Oh, I'm just feeling it tighten up now. Pull it together a bit, not forcing it, and then go over to do the other one. Kind of spread that load. Watch that bolt. You want to make sure it's rotating, moving forward, not too much torque on there so you don't strip anything. As you're torquing these up, you want to just make sure that once that contacts and bottoms out somewhere on the frame, you're pretty much good. Snug it up a little bit, but don't over torque it. Make sure it's even on both sides. Little tiny bit of gap there still, I can see. So I'm going to try and torque it up just a little more. Now that the back bolts are pretty much torqued up, I'm going to go ahead and start snugging these guys down. Once again, go around and do them evenly, just like the other ones, because they're going into the aluminum. Torqued up all these bolts. Now we're going to do the main through bolts. You need a 3/8 inch Allen head. and a 19 mil for the one side on the nut. So you do a nut and washer on one side and then the Allen head on the other. So do our washers and then our 19 mil nuts. .3/8 Allen on this side, and we'll snug them up. Snug them up evenly. All right, that's nice and tight. Perfect. Then the last ones will be the ones that go into the gusset here and also connect to the A-arm. This one isn't lining up 100%, but the other side is. There we go, it's pretty much lined up now. So that's that. Now let's go over it all and double check all your hardware is torqued up. Once in a while, things go better than you planned. It's happy dance time, cause here's the billet hanger bearing. Here are welded on nuts from the factory that the hanger bearing mounts to. Next to this nut is an extra hole. I'm assuming it must be for a RZR or some other chassis configuration. And there's tons of room left in that slotted hole on that side. And this one was maxed out. The shaft doesn't sit straight, so that's why there's slotted holes so you can align it. If I utilize this hole instead of that hole for my mounting, so I'll use the OEM bolt with a nylock on the bottom here. That gives me all the travel I need. Now, I've got more than I need. And all I gotta do is this. Now you can see, I'm way too far forward, but I can slide my shaft. So that was all the adjustment I needed. I don't even have to remove the hanger bearing or modify anything. I just had to remove the passenger side bolt. I'm gonna utilize the other hole, which fits all the hardware. And if it doesn't, simply needs to be drilled out like a touch. And then we'll nylock it, and that'll hold the hanger bearing in place. I didn't have to take apart the hanger bearing or anything like that. Driveline's all still together, everything's easy. I'll just relocate the bolt, piece of cake. I love it when stuff comes together like that. And we all know that's pretty rare that you get something that works out like that. That's a win. Super stoked about this. I'm gonna get that rigged up and then we'll show you the finished product. Then we'll have no issues getting a bolt or a roll pin in there. Everything lines up great and we can start our reassembly. Awesome. Okay, I think the diff's in. Look at that. We got the bolt coming through the roll pin hole. Everything's lined up now. I just had to shift that hanger bearing forward a little bit. I'll show you that in a second. Diff looks all lined up. Everything's snugged up. Just got to put some Loctite and a nut on the other side of this bolt. Everything's nice, not sloppy at all. Diff looks great in there. So you can see this spot is the OEM spot. There's one welded on nut there for the hanger bearing. Here, there's another welded on nut, like on the other side for the hanger bearing, plus an additional hole. That additional hole there is what I put my bolt through and then put a nut and nylock with some Loctite. And essentially that setup right there positions my prop shaft perfectly and lines it all up nicely with the hole in the input shaft and the prop shaft for the roll pin and or the bolt like I utilized. We are in action, we're in business, no issues at all. Actually had a little bit extra room there, so it works out perfectly. So if you're running this setup, all you gotta do is relocate your passenger side bolt to the additional hole. If that hole's not there, you can go ahead and drill one. There's plenty of space there to drill even another hole if you needed to on either side. If you really need to work with something, if you have more of a custom driveline or something else, you got plenty of room to work with here. So I don't see that being an issue. I mean, you've got enough to almost arguably pull about an inch of slop out of there. Lots of options here from that perspective. That was the only little hiccup I ran into. So with that being done now, guys, we are officially in the check over stage. Gonna check over all the nuts and bolts that I installed, check over all the pieces that I have around the diff here, torque up everything, double check it, triple check it, and we are into reassembly. So now essentially we're gonna do the reverse of what we did to take all this apart. If you have a RZR 1000, a non-turbo, you will have to run turbo axles, or at least the cup, the inside cup off a turbo. If you have a Rhino 2.0 axle, you can order just the inner joints if you want to save a few bucks, or just as an example, but you will need turbo axles. I've already got a turbo, so I don't need to worry about that, but I do have 2 brand new Rhino 2.0s to put in there to mate with the brand new diff. That being said, essentially we're gonna just dig in and do everything we did in the past backwards. Reassembly kind of sucks sometimes, but it's bittersweet because it means the job's almost over and then you get to go test the stuff. And I mean, hey, that's why we do it. We do it so we can beat on it more reliably on the trail. And I think this differential is going to provide exactly that. 2 thumbs up for this kit. It's amazing. So let's dig in there. Let's make sure everything buttons up, goes back together. And I'll also go over a few more little details where of what I think is important, what we need to pay attention to get this to reassemble properly and be reliable on the trail. Let's dive in there. The sooner we get started, the sooner we get finished. So we're gonna slap the gusset plate on. If you have one, you're gonna put that on. I'm gonna mount that. And then I'm gonna slowly mock up everything else, front bumper, stuff like that. I'm gonna be relocating the winch, like I said. So I'm gonna have to mess around with that. This reassembly in my case is gonna involve a little bit more kind of problem solving, but if you're just putting your machine back together exactly the way it was, then you're just gonna follow the reverse of how you take everything apart. Now, if you don't already have fresh coolant, then it would be a good idea to go get some, because you're not gonna wanna put the old coolant back in the system. I'm not doing a whole flush and drain here. It's a real pain in the butt from what I've heard to bleed these systems, so I'm just gonna top it all off. About half the coolant is out, so about half of it will be new. I haven't had any issues with the coolant or overheating or anything like that, so everything should be fine. I'm gonna take you through this reassembly pretty quickly, and I'm just gonna touch on a few points of how I will modify certain things to make them fit. I know I will not be the only one that's gonna relocate my winch. If you've got a turbo, then more than likely the easiest thing for you to do is to relocate that winch somewhere else, like on the bumper, rather than trying to shove it back in between the firewall, the rad, and the intercooler, because it's just such a crappy spot and a nightmare for it. Now, mind you, if you are gonna use your bumper as your winch point, you gotta make sure that bumper is mounted properly. If you have like a Polaris lock and ride bumper, that bumper is not designed as a winch point. You will rip it out if you try to use it for a bigger pull, and that could put you in a sticky situation. Hardest part is done. If you know what to do from here on in, then I mean, realistically, you can check out. Thanks for watching. Smash that thumbs up button if this video was helpful, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date with the future content and more videos like this. If you want to follow along and see the way I put it back together, or see how I relocate my winch, then I welcome you to keep hanging out and join me. All right, gusset plate is simple. Just slap that baby on there. Now it's also a good time to check the diff fluid level before you start remounting everything else, and just make sure everything's fine. So you see that just slaps on there, and then the lower A-arm bolts will hold it into place. This also adds some skid protection here for the front and does a really good job actually covering up that hole I cut out. The aluminum portion that goes up here will do a good job covering the rest of that, so I don't really have to worry. The bracket includes this piece here, which gets welded on up here. But for my application, I feel it's just gonna add a headache, and I don't really need the protection in that given spot. You can see the aluminum piece I have fabbed up for here covers up the rest of the front portion there. The bumper plate will also sit up here, so it'll add even more protection. Nothing's gonna hit that diff there. If you have never flushed or bled your brakes since owning your machine, now would be a good time to do that. You can get a pump or a turkey baster or something into that reservoir, suck out all that old fluid, fill it up with fresh brake fluid, and bleed your brake system. It's a really good idea. The best way to improve and maintain braking performance in a lot of applications is to just keep a fresh fluid in there. We run our machines in really terrible conditions, so moisture does build up in the brake fluid and reduce its effectiveness, and also lead to corrosion and stuff like that. So it's a cheap, easy way to maintain the quality of your brakes, is to change that fluid at least every year. You should be doing a flush. It's so easy on a machine like this. There's not much fluid in it anyways. Okay, I've just got my bumper mocked up there right now. You can still see that covers that section nicely. We got a little bit of gap here from these gusset plate covering up that hole we cut out, but as soon as I put my aluminum bottom plate on, it covers that up really nice, and there's no issues of anything hitting the differential there. It's really well protected and covered up. You can tell this skid plate's taken some serious hits, and I've had it on there for quite some time with no issues. This section of the frame and the chassis is really well supported with that gusset plate, the bumper plate, and this lower aluminum skid plate portion. So as you can see, the bumper just kind of mocked up there on 2 bolts without the rest of the setup on there. And I'm gonna see how my winch looks when I mount it around here. It will reduce some airflow to the radiator intercooler, unfortunately, but there's nowhere else to really put it. I don't want to put it down low here. It'd be too hard the way I've got everything set up. Next step, we are going to reinstall the rad support bracket, as well as the outer upper A-arm bracket that bolts on over the stock fair lead location here. It is also a secondary mounting location for the bumper. So that just slaps on there basically. As you can see, it is one of the A-arm brackets there. Okay, remount your lower rad support with the 4 bolts you took out. Okay, snug those up, don't over torque them. Now we will also mount the front bracket here. Okay, now we will remount this bracket, 4 bolts. Depending on your winch setup, you may have stock bolts here. You may have aftermarket ones for your fair lead if you're running the winch back here. I'm reusing the bolts I used originally for my to mount like the fair lead when the winch was mounted in there. This is a structural part of the front suspension, so you want to make sure you got these bolts in there even if you're not running a winch up front, because you want to make sure everything holds together nice and tight, because your front A-arms are mounted here, and this is also doubling as your 2 main bumper mount points on a lot of aftermarket bumpers, as well as I believe on your Polaris lock and ride bumper. It's just on the aftermarket bumpers, they bolt through. On the lock and ride, it's just kind of one of those silly lock and ride fasteners. Just make sure you got those 4 bolts in there. Okay, those are snugged up. Now is a really good time to mock up your front bumper if you need to make sure things fit, or if you want to set up that front winch mount, because you've got your top mounting locations in place. You've got the bottom ones, and like I mentioned earlier, I welded some nuts to these 3 holes here, so my bumper mounts really nice in the front, and 3 spots there, 2 spots here. Realistically, that's pretty solid. I've also got the exoskeleton bars, 1 up here and 1 here, that hold everything together nicely. Straight up, I don't think this bumper is mounted to my standard for like a main winch point or a hard aggressive pull. I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. It should be fine if you keep in mind that it's like probably strong enough, but I wouldn't really beat and abuse it too bad. If I want to use it for that, I would consider maybe adding a mounting location. For controlled winching, it should be fine, and it should easily hold the weight of your vehicle. I did notice I had a wear mark, like a rub right there. It's not super deep. Put some electrical tape around it and just try to protect it a little bit. It's a good time to inspect all these and make sure there isn't any issues, because they're very easy to fix now and they won't be later, and you won't be able to see them later. That's also why I cleaned up all these lines just quickly, got all the mud off them, just to make sure there wasn't any problems kind of creeping up on me. Okay, I've gone ahead and wrapped that section up with some electrical tape, and the heat from the fluid circulating through those lines will cook and bake that adhesive on there really nice, kind of like a protective sheath for that, so that issue doesn't get any bigger. I took the brake reservoir off because it is full of junk and crud. That's why I was mentioning it's easy to get to right now. So if you've never done this and your machine's a few years old, I think now would be a good time to spend 30 minutes, clean up the sealing surfaces, make sure you don't get any dirt in there, blow it off good with air first, cover those up when you're blowing it off, and it's a great time to fully flush your brake system. And I'm just gonna clean this reservoir so it looks new. Side note, when you're cleaning a plastic reservoir like this, you don't want to use brake clean on these plastic components. It could chew through them. You want to use something that's plastic safe. This electronic cleaner states right up here that it is plastic safe. Brake Clean states that it is not safe on plastic, so just keep that in mind. You don't want to damage this reservoir. Then blow it out with air really good when you're done. Good as new, rinsed out, dried off. No more contamination in there. Ready to go back on and do a nice clean fluid flush. Preventative maintenance is key, guys. Okay, now with all the little odds and ends in here addressed, we are going to get the radiator ready to install. We got to mount the rad fan back on the radiator itself, and then we can slip it into place. Okay, so let's position the intercooler. It's got the rubber mounting tabs in 4 spots that slide into the holes here. Keep in mind our upper rad support is not in place yet. So we're just gonna sit these here for now. Intercooler, now rad with the fan attached. All right, with the intercooler in place, we can try shoving this radiator back in there with the fan on it. It mounts the same way on just 4 rubber isolator. Make sure you get your fan wiring connector in a spot where it's easy to plug in. And I don't really know the easiest way to get this in there, so let's try like this. Feels like there's some hoses in the way, so I'll move those out of the way and just get those bottom mounts in place into the hole. Perfect. Fits right in there nicely, almost like it should. Bye-bye to all of your space that you just had. It's gone, it's out of the way. So I'm gonna get the connectors hooked up. Mind you, the upper rad support obviously isn't in yet, so these are just flopping around. So we'll get all the connectors hooked up. I'll get the rubber hoses hooked up, and then we will deal with the upper rad support. So yeah, just go ahead and hook all your hoses up to the rad, to the intercooler. I'm gonna leave the clamps off until they're all on and until my bracket is secured, so that if I need to twist or move any of them, I still have the ability to do that easily. Now look back there. Good, like, you don't wanna try and shove a winch in there. It's just so annoying. Now I feel with this bracket, there's even less room. Yeah, not happening. Especially, you know what, once in a while your winch messes up, or you gotta get it out, or you get to something, and it's such a pain in the ass dealing with it in there. Okay, rads are in place. I've got all my clamps positioned where they need to be. All the lines look like they're running properly. Okay, next step is we're gonna mount the upper rad support. But before I do that, I'm gonna mess around with my front bumper and figuring out how it's gonna be mounted on here while all this is still kind of movable and easier to get to and access, just in case I need to fabricate anything. I can still kind of move this out of the way. So we'll pick up in a little bit. All right, I'm gonna modify my Super ATV front bumper to fit a front mount winch. We're gonna remove this grill. We're gonna remove the cross tube here, open up this area and clean it up, and then we're gonna mount a winch plate down in here with a winch on it. Should be a pretty easy modification. Makes sense in my head. We'll make it work. Might not be the prettiest looking bumper when I'm done. It should be pretty sweet. It's gonna mount right up here. Okay, trim the welds off of the grill with a zip disc. Now I'm just gonna clean this section up. We don't need that no more. Messed up the zip disc at the end, but it didn't explode on my face, so that's a win. We will remove this cross tube and try to clean that section up as well. Zip disc took this guy out no problem too. Far from pretty, but nothing I can't clean up. If you choose to do this, then just take your time, mock up something that works. It doesn't necessarily have to be super pretty as long as it's strong. Oh yeah, the Battle Wagon is tank mode now. The only way this winch plate is coming off of this bumper is if this bumper completely comes off of the RZR, which could happen. You never know, but the winch will stay secure. It's not the prettiest, and yes, it's not fully centered because the winch is lopsided, and in order to center the winch mount needs to be off to the side. But with the winch mounted on there, it'll look great. It looks really mean with the winch up on there. So you guys will see that. Anyways, it's getting late. I just want to finish up the fabricating here so I can just focus on getting this bumper cleaned up and painted tomorrow morning, and then continue on with the reassembly. Stuff always takes so much longer than it's supposed to because you end up doing 10 things you didn't plan on doing. So I fabbed up a winch mount for the front of the bumper.
The paint doesn't really match, that's all I had. It's not exactly pretty, but it'll do for now.
I'm gonna pull that off now, and now I can move forward with the rest of the reassembly because the bumper is gonna be the last thing we put on. I just wanted to get that out of the way before we did everything else. Now that we've got the lower rad support, the intercooler, the rad, and fan, everything in, now for reassembly is to put our upper rad supports in. You want the bends kind of facing in this way. You want the bracket like this. And they just go on the rubber isolators here, one at the bottom. Put that one on first. And the top, and it'll pull everything into place for you. If you've taken anything else off that we didn't really go over because you felt you needed to, or you had some wiring or some custom parts or accessories somewhere, then make sure you put those on as well. I can't cover all that because I don't know what's on your machine. I know my machine has quite a bit extra on it. I'm sure a lot of your machines do too, especially if you're going to the level of doing this diff swap. I'm sure there's a lot more done to your machine. So now we'll just secure these with the bolts. These are important because they hold the rads in place, and they also hold our voltage regulator and a few other trim pieces like the hood here. If you put them on the wrong way backwards, then the stuff won't line up, so you'll know. Now that that bracket's on, we're gonna stick our voltage regulator on there. If it's dirty, like the connectors you have are dirty and gross, give them a wipe. Air deflector for the hood scoop, if you've got one. Mount that. Voltage regulator is bolted down. Everything's clicked in. For really important connections like this, realize that Polaris gives you specific like zip tie mounts in areas. Utilize those. And I like to utilize more. I really like to zip tie all the wiring so it's not dangling or moving around. All that shaking, all that movement, all that eventually will cause issues of rubbing through. This is an offer application. Think about how much it's bouncing around. There's dirt and grit everywhere. The worst thing to do is trying to chase down like a rub through wire somewhere in the middle of a wiring loom. Keep all those connections really tight when you're reassembling. They are far from perfect from the factory, so go around, make sure everything's zip tied up and not moving around. You'll be thankful in the long run. Okay, got all my wiring cleaned up, everything back in place here. Next step is we're gonna fill up the coolant. You can use any universal coolant. The Prestone universal coolant works fine. I like to get the concentrated stuff and then mix it 50-50 with distilled water, not tap water. We're not going to get into the coolant conversation here. I've been running the OEM coolant that came in this machine for 5 years with no issues. So this stuff will be just fine for what I need. Yes, you can run different coolants, but I'll leave that up to you or to another video. If you were to drain the entire system, I think it's about 10 or 11 liters. We're not obviously going to put that much in because I didn't drain the engine and stuff like that. I really don't care too much. And I know bleeding these can be a pain in the butt. So you'll fill the reservoir pretty much full, and you're not going to be able to get everything you need in. You're going to have to wait for the cooling system to cycle and the thermostat to open, and then you're going to have to monitor this and top it off and monitor your engine temperatures once the vehicle's running to make sure everything's okay. All right, now that we're starting to put the A-arms on, it's an easy time to get in there and double check the fluid level in your diff. We filled it up on the bench. I just want to make sure that that fluid is up to where it needs to be. It should be kind of to the bottom of the fill plug, or just so you can touch it with your finger. I'm guessing mine might start leaking out, be a little overfilled. If it starts to leak out right away, I'm not pulling the plug, I'm leaving it with a little bit of extra juice in there. This is an 8mm Allen head. Yep, I can see the fluid level there. It's right at the fill plug level there. Make sure you grease the bolts going into your A-arms. I know a lot of them have grease nipples. They don't really work very well. Use a good quality grease that's water resistant. This CRC stuff works really well. It's a wheel bearing grease, but it's got really good washout characteristics. Also, always make sure you use blue Loctite on all of these fasteners. Everywhere on this suspension, every bolt needs blue Loctite, even if it's got a nylock. These A-arms have metal bushings in them. They don't wear out. So inspect your bolts to make sure they're not damaged or the threads on them aren't damaged. If you have an OEM poly or like a rubber style bushing, then it's a good time to inspect them or potentially change them. Gone to these bushings ages ago because trying to keep bushings in some of these machines is a nightmare. Plus, it's not like you're gonna notice a ride difference on a metal bushing versus a rubber bushing. This isn't like a Cadillac. Plus, we've got 20 inches of suspension travel. I'm sure it can compensate for the bushing. I'm changing my steering setup here, so I'm going to put on my new Super ATV heavy duty steering rods and tie rods and all that, so I'm gonna have to adjust my alignment. So we'll go ahead now and we'll put the axle in and then the upper A-arm. I'm also putting on a brand new set of Rhino 2.0s, and I'm also gonna put a touch of grease just on the splines in there to make getting that axle out easier later. Not a ton of grease. You don't wanna pack it full of grease because then it could pop the axle out or the C-clip might not engage. Just a little bit on the splines. Notice this grease sticks really well. It's nice and tacky. You do get what you pay for in products like this, for sure. A lot of those cheap China greases, I mean, I'm not even gonna go there. They're just, on a machine that's worth this much money, are you really gonna go save $5 or $10 on grease? You buy a good container of grease, it'll literally last you years. Nice new Rhino 2.0s. Oh yeah, this whole driveline is gonna be pretty new. Look at those. Sweet. Make sure your C-clips on there are good. Everything looks okay with it. And we will put this axle in. Usually you have to smack them with a rubber mallet once you line up the splines. There we go, splines are lined. Bottom out the axle. Unthread the bolt and the nut a bit so you don't damage the threads. Use a rubber mallet and smack it in. There we go. You just gotta make sure the splines are lined up and that C-clip's not binding up against the splines anywhere there. Sometimes the C-clip doesn't want to pop in, so just reposition the axle and give it another hit. Make sure it won't come out. It's in there good, C-clips engaged. One more whack. Perfect. Plunge the axle. Yep, everything feels good. These axles have plunge on the inner and the outer joint. I'm gonna get my steering all set up now. If you don't have to worry about that, then you can go ahead and you can mount your upper A-arm now. Okay, so now that we've got the lower A-arm mounted, we've got the axle in, we can go ahead and we can mount the upper A-arm and we can remount the spindle assembly and everything attached to it. Then we'll get the shock back down here, connect all that in the steering assembly, and we're getting pretty close to the finished product. As far as reassembly is concerned, there'll just be a few minor details left up with the plastics and the fascia, stuff like that, which is pretty easy, and then we'll fire it up and we'll bleed the cooling system, make sure everything's okay, and then the moment of truth will come when we do our test ride. All right, let's remount the upper A-arm now. Remember, it's a good idea to grease the unthreaded portion, not the threaded portion. We'll be putting Loctite on that. Make sure your steering rod here is below the A-arm. There's that one. It should also slide through the gusset portion on your frame, that gusset bracket. Just spreading the grease around a little bit. Next step, we'll grab our spindle assembly. I've got a brand new wheel bearing in here. Polaris HD wheel bearing. I recommend you run the Polaris HD wheel bearing. Part number 3515090. This is the best wheel bearing you can get. It has metal dust shields. It's made in Japan by Koyo. It comes packed full of nice white lithium style grease. This is way better than the other OEM wheel bearings, and any aftermarket wheel bearing. Do not run aftermarket wheel bearings. When I put the spindles back on, I also like to put a little bit of grease inside here so those ball joints go in there nicely and come out nicely. Once again, I'm using that good quality CRC grease because it's really good at resisting washout. It's not going to go away the first time you pressure wash the machine. Anything, it's a huge pain in the butt to wash off. Usually the best way to get this off, I find, is by spraying it with something like a penetrating lube, like a WD-40 CRC Power Lube. That cuts right through it, melts it, makes it easy to wipe out. So another trick I like is I like to put a punch inside here and just smack it in to spread those to make them easier to put on the ball joint. So we'll start with the upper. I find it's easier. And then we'll just put the punch in here and just smack it in there just a little bit. Thin layer of lube, the ball joints. I will also be greasing these ball joints once I put them on and assemble everything. I find if you grease them before, they get really hard to move because the grease fills in all the voids or all the spare space in there and makes them feel tight and brand new again when you grease them. You don't need to do all of these greasing steps if you don't want to. It's a little OCD. I know a lot of you will think that, but I really feel these little things add up and pay off. I'll also be lubing these bolts. Once again, not on the threaded sections. Those are getting Loctite, blue Loctite. Take your nut off your axle if it's on there and your washers. Also lube up those axle splines a bit, not crazy. Just a little so they don't stick. It makes it easier to come apart. Usually the outers don't pose any issues. It's usually more the inner in the diff that wants to be a pain from time to time if you haven't had them apart for a long time mostly. Now we will slide this guy on here, move him over, and we'll get our upper in place. Slides right in there, see that? Because of the punch. The bolt head mounts out on these. A reason for that is the caliper will prevent this bolt from backing out. It's like a safety, a redundancy. If you mount it the other way, you can take it apart easier without removing the caliper. The only way to get this out is by removing the caliper, but if for some reason something happens, the nut falls off, that caliper will hold that bolt there and it'll prevent your ball joint from separating. Now to get it in, you gotta drop it a bit. There we go. And that bolt slides into the groove in the ball joint. You want to make sure you get any grease or lube off of that threaded portion of the bolt because it will inhibit the effectiveness of the thread lock you will be using. We will now do the bottom. Let's get that punch in there. There we go. Usually you got to lift up on this to get it all lined up. There we go. Bolt in. Punch out, wiggle it a bit. That one was being a little stubborn. Wipe the grease off if there's any. I also like to put some grease around the bearing here just to keep some water and debris from the actual dust cap. Just paint it on there. Not too thick, but a good enough layer that it will actually do something and seal everything out. You can go ahead and hook up your steering linkage now too. If you haven't removed it or anything, your alignment and everything will be in place like it should be. I've installed a Super ATV heavy duty steering setup, so I need to run a misalignment spacer converted to a spherical joint here. These are stronger, although I do find the lifespan of these cheaper sphericals are not as long as an OEM steering tie rod, but they are stronger. If you're running a stock tie rod, then I recommend Loctite. If you're running an aftermarket tie rod, I recommend Loctite. Nylock or not, I Loctite everything. Next, we can put our hub assembly on. Engage the splines nicely, lift up, and then slide in the wheel bearing. If you pay attention, I've also lubed all these sections here, not the splines because I lubed the splines on the axle. Now, important, you run the washers that were supplied with your axle and the nut hand tight for now. We will have to torque this. If your wheels have center caps, remove them, or what we'll do is we'll put a pry bar in here and we'll torque it all down. For now, I'm gonna leave all this stuff loose on my application. You can go ahead and torque it. I wanna go over a few more things and bleed the brakes. Okay, next we can connect our brake caliper actually, and then the shock. If you did what I did and tied up or zip tied up your calipers and shocks out of the way, now we're gonna remove them. Good time to change your brakes, your brake pads, service the brake calipers, double check for any weird wear. We're gonna reinstall these bolts to hold the caliper onto the carrier. Since you're utilizing Loctite on all these fasteners, in between removal and replacement, make sure you hit these with a wire wheel really nicely, because Loctite has a way of building up and it almost forms like a plastic, and it impacts the way the threads engage. So always clean it, make sure your threads are nice and clean. Inspect these threads, make sure they're not damaged. I found 2 or 3 damaged bolts that I replaced while doing this. Your bolt will only hold if all the threads are good, right? And you torque these on quite tight, have them on and off multiple times, the hardware will wear out or it can get damaged. Okay, blue Loctite on these too. Start them by hand, always start them by hand. On a lot of applications, like whether it's cars or whatever, this is a real common bolt people cross thread. If the caliper is on a weird angle or something, it can feel like it engaged, and you can easily cross thread it and damage the bolt, or usually not the bolt, but the bracket. Torque those down to spec, those are good. Your brake lines, depending on your setup with your A-arms and everything, you can re-secure them to where they need to go. If you have a limit strap, you're gonna hook those back up once we drop the shock here. Okay, we're gonna lower the shock down. Take your shock bolt. Also good idea to lube it. If you're running a limit strap, make sure you position your spacers and your alignment spacers or washers properly. Washer on the outside here, bolt head on the outside, and then you're gonna lift this entire assembly. Now for my application, I have this spacer to space the limit strap, and getting these limit straps on can be a pain in the butt because they stop the shock from fully extending, plus they stretch a bit. So you're gonna have to lift up the assembly to get that nut on, and it can be a pain. So what I usually do in this situation is, now that the shock's engaged, it's not that easy to lift it. So what I'll do is I'll put that nut on there for now. We will blue Loctite this, and then once the vehicle's ready to lower on the ground, I will slowly lower it and put weight on it until the bolt hole on the limit strap lines up and I can put it in. Right now it's about 1.5 inches off. So we'll just let that dangle for now. You can pretty much go ahead now and torque down your axle nut, put a cotter pin in it, or wait until you put it on the ground with the wheels and torque it down. I like using the pry bar in between the wheel lugs and then using a torque wrench on here. You can do it, it's a one-man job. A longer pry bar works a lot better, it gives you more leverage, easier to hold. Really important to torque these to spec, so look up the torque specifications for your vehicle online. That's that. Then we can go ahead, we can double check everything, all the bolts, and then we can go ahead and put the wheels on. Had a bit of a brain fart. You gotta put these bolts head on here, on the inside, threaded end out towards the front of the vehicle on all 4 of these connections. On top, because if you put it in the other way, you won't be able to get it out if you want to remove your control arm without removing this whole front clip, which sucks. And second of all, you got to pull the stock factory washer off of that upper A-arm mount here on the front so that it clears this gusset tab. It just barely fits in there. So you got to make sure you mount it that way. And on the lowers, you want to mount it that way too, because it makes it easier to disassemble this later without removing, like if you have a front skid plate or a bumper or something like that, sometimes they get in the way there. So making sure that the bolt heads are facing towards the back of the machine is very beneficial here. Just kind of got caught up making the video earlier and missed that. So I just noticed it because I went to put these bolts on. I'm like, hey, they don't fit. So yeah, correction, make sure you mount yours properly. Learn from my mistake. So for the uppers with the aluminum gusset tabs here, you're gonna pull the bolt for the gusset tab to install that. Then
blue Loctite and torque the upper A-arm bolt, and then reinsert that additional bolt that holds the tab in place, the gusset tab, and torque that down. That's this guy right here, right in there, once you've already torqued all this up. Like I said, always, always, always blue Loctite on all these fasteners. Don't be shy. Once you've got everything else torqued up, tie rods, all your nuts on the upper and lower A-arms, all the hardware on your adapter bracket, everything else except the shock. Unless you don't have limit straps, then you can go ahead and tighten the shock. However, a lot of people will tell you should torque the shock with the weight of the vehicle on it. You can decide what you want to do there. Make sure you torque all the hardware on your brake calipers, blue Loctite on those as well. Now we're going to torque the axle nut. I'm going to do it this way. You can go like this and risk damaging the threads, or you can use your brain a bit. Thread some lug nuts on there. Then you don't have to worry about chewing the threads. Torque wrench. Torque spec for the wheel bolts on a RZR Turbo and a Turbo S is 180 foot-pounds. There's a lot of debate about this. I've been torquing them to 180 foot-pounds for quite a few years. A lot of people just say the impact on them. A lot of people say they do 110, 120, 130. Do what you feel is right, but I feel that there's a reason they specify 180 foot-pounds, and I'm guessing a lot of that reason is to preload the bearing. The bearing needs that torque to stay together. People say it's absurd and you can't get 180 foot-pounds. You can get 180 foot-pounds no problem, as long as your torque wrench is nice and long. And you've got, I can do it this way by myself. If the machine is on the ground, get someone to stand on the brakes, for example, get the center caps off your wheels, and then torque it like that. So just torque it till it clicks. The camera's kind of in the way here for me. Let me see if I can get in there. Make sure those washers are in there like I mentioned earlier. You need those. Likely if you get anything around like 140 plus on these, you should be good. Sometimes the cotter pin holes don't line up perfectly, so you gotta tighten them up a bit or loosen them off a bit. Sometimes you can't go any tighter. You don't want to go above that 180 mark. So you're better off going a little under and making sure the cotter pin holes line up. Mine line up really nice now. I'm at around 140 foot-pounds. Yeah, I'm at like 140, 150. This torque wrench I'm using caps out at 150. I gotta go grab my bigger one. But that just shows you at 150, my cotter pin holes are lined up perfectly. Okay, the front clip is pretty much on. Still got to wire up the headlights. The plastics are on, the bumper's on. You see the winch plate there. Got the wiring for the winch run up front. I already got some messages online about how the winch plate is set up. It's ghetto, but it's strong. I used the stock winch plate. I cut it to fit. I welded a square tube between the two cross tubes that mount the main mount of the bumper there. I ran a piece of angle iron along the bottom of the winch plate to get a bigger surface area, welded it to the winch plate, then welded it to the square bar, welded the square bar to those crossbars like I said, welded the angle iron to the square bar completely, and then I welded these two up tubes on there. It passes the, it's strong. It's not going anywhere. It's far from pretty. The welds are far from pretty. Is it pretty? No. Is there penetration? Is it gonna hold? Would it pass the hammer test? Oh yeah. And you'll see it's gonna pass the winch test too. I can tell. I've stuck enough stuff together to know if it's gonna hold or whether I should be worried. I welded the fair lead right onto there. I cut the stock fair lead. I kind of jimmy rigged it and welded it from behind here. I don't know if you can see it. I drilled some holes and put 3 tacks in and then welded around the perimeter. I probably should have put a bead down there, but realistically, I don't think that's going anywhere. This winch mount and bumper setup needs to survive until I do my next big mod, which is a full custom cage with exoskeleton and the whole 9 yards. This RS1 diff swap was like at the top of the list of like big mods I really wanted to do to make this machine perform the way I feel it should and be reliable. And the next mod is a safety mod. I want to upgrade my seats to a proper
beautiful top end seat with some nice, and get my retractable harnesses back. And then I want to do a full out cage with a rear rack built into it, over the hood bars, back bars, tied into my exoskeleton. And like, if it lays over, it lays over. You push it back and you try again. I want a cage that's functional, that I can use, that I don't need to worry about wrecking stuff when I lay over. This exo cage and these bumpers work well, but they're far from as stout as I'd like them to be, and it's stock cage. I'll leave it at that.
Anyways, it's looking good, guys. It's gone together well. The front end is all together. Just got to tighten up that shock bolt once we get the wheels on it. I'm gonna have to set the alignment, but the bumper, everything's on. I got my my bolts were a little too long, so I spaced them out. But I got my 3 main mount points down there. Those are nice and strong. And then the 2 guys up here, plus they tie into my exo cage. So it should be fairly stout. I'm gonna get the winch wired up and get the grill on, get the rest of the plastics on, button everything up. I've had it running. It seems to be cooling fine. The fan's kicking on. Temperature is not going above where it needs to be. I put in about as much coolant as I took out, so I'm feeling it's pretty good. We'll fire it up again once the wheels are out outside and go over it in more detail. Overall, how hard was this job? In my mind, with a fair bit of fabrication experience and just like shade tree mechanics, I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10 because there's cutting of the frame involved. Honestly, I think it's a 4 or 5. It's disassembly and reassembly. That's it. It's nothing crazy. Let's call it a 6 to 6.5. If you don't have the tools, if you don't have the know-how, if you're a complete noob and rookie, it's probably an 8. But for someone who's a seasoned off-roader, who's done their own wrenching for years, who knows their way around a shop and some basic tools and some basic fag seals, like I said, no more than a 6 out of 10. You can do it. You can do it if you follow this video and buy a few tools, even if you're like a rookie. Follow the steps, watch it 5 times, bit by bit, work your way through it. You can do it. You can do a diff swap. You can do clutches. You can do all sorts of work. You can rebuild your diff. If you can read instructions and follow a video, you can do it. Just, that's what I'm saying. Cut once, measure twice. Well stocked when it comes to CRC products. I've got like their full line of chemicals in the shop. They look after me really well. Oh, this stuff's awesome. Evapor rust. I don't know if you guys have tried. If you got things that's super rusty, you just let it sit in that. Eats the rust away. And their products are kind of priced in the mid to higher range, but it's definitely one of those you get what you pay for. Plus, come on guys, you gotta give them some credit. They invented brake clean. Oh yeah. So we got the lower portion of the front skid plate on. This part of my machine is so reinforced. I went a little over here and I've got my front A-arm hardware and that whole front frame section covered up as well. And you can see this has taken some hits, so it's doing its job. These arms have taken a few hits too. Well, wouldn't you look at that? There's wheels on it. I think we are at the point of lowering it down and getting it ready for its test drive. Everything's together. Last thing we got to do, like I mentioned, is we're gonna lower it down since we have limit straps. And with the weight of the vehicle, we will hook up the limit strap to the bolt and torque those down. Make sure you secure your brake lines out of the way, however you had them before you check to make sure everything's clearing everywhere. Make sure everything looks fine. Double check those bolts one last time since we had a lot apart. We'll be ready for the test drive. We'll take it for a little spin and 2-wheel drive. Then we'll try and engage the 4x4, see if it's all clicking in right, make sure it's not making any weird noises, any weird sounds. I've just got my road tires on right now, my hard pack tires, my BF Goodrich mud trains, my KM3s. It's a low grip tire for kind of like trail riding. It's good for wheel spin. It's great for testing this diff out. We'll take it on a couple of my backyard trails. There's a few climbs there where we can just try to crawl up them and make sure those front wheels are engaging the way they should be. As long as that all holds together well, we'll do some higher speed rides. We'll try the 4x4 down the road. We'll let that diff kind of work its way in. It's brand new. It's got to move around a little bit. And then
as long as all that checks out, then essentially we're done. Once you park it after your first ride or two, it's always good to go over the bracket, make sure all the bolts are snugged up. Things have a way of twisting and shifting sometimes once you run the machine. So you're just gonna wanna make sure everything's okay so that these issues don't pop out on the trail, because a loose bolt right now isn't a big deal. You torque it up, it's good. You leave it there, it backs out, something else loosens up, and you run into collateral. Collateral damage is the most painful kind of damage to deal with because it's stuff that could have been avoided. Let's go test this baby out. I mean, this is the moment we've all been waiting for. Our new and improved Big Diff Razor. So if you need any info at all, www.razorbigdiff.com. CCM Machining. Joe Kaufman designed this setup. You can get it through CCM on his website at razorbigdiff.com, or you can go to All Things UTV. However, if you want the Hill Killer diff setup like I've got here, currently he is the only one offering it, and the demand for it is quite high.
Okay, so let's line up that limit strap bolt now. So we're gonna just lower the machine down bit by bit till it lines up. There we go. That's in. Now I'll hammer the bolt through. On this setup, I gotta move the bolt head back a bit to get that to clear the A-arm, and it's all a really tight fit. There we go, that's through. Just make sure you got enough there to engage the nut. Pretty much the last step of our install before the test now. Do the same to the other side. Well guys, here we are outside finally. Just messed around with the Razor. Got the alignment set pretty good, I feel. Good enough to test drive and just fine tune. I didn't torque everything down 100%, kind of like 80, so as I go for a cruise, if I feel the alignment's off, I can stop and just kind of tweak it a little bit more if I need to. I've not engaged the 4x4 yet. I'm waiting to do that on camera. So I've just gone back and forth in two-wheel drive. I had two little coolant leaks, you can probably see right there on the driveway, coming from the rad hoses. I left the spring clamp on top and then had enough room to put a hose clamp on the bottom, so I double clamped it. I'll keep an eye on the intercooler piping, and before my big 20-hour endurance race, I will also replace those spring clamps with proper hose clamps. I just didn't have the right size on hand right now. They're not leaking, so it's good enough. We'll just keep an eye on it. It's always something. You're never completely done. But anyways, the machine, it looks damn good. I'm just gonna put the quarter windshield back on. I pulled some of the decals, cleaned it up. It hasn't had a good wash in a while, so once I know everything's fine, we'll go around and we'll detail it. So we're gonna use these to test out the machine. I've never even driven on these rims. I've got so many different sets of wheels and tires that I'm constantly swapping around. I'm a little bit of a wheel and tire whore, always have been, even back in the car world days. So with that being said, we're gonna break in the machine on these. They also slip a lot more than the other tires, so it'll be a good chance to see on the backyard trails where we take it. We're gonna do a few slow crawls just to see if that front diff is engaging the way it should be and disengaging the way it should be. And these tires will be really good at that because they don't offer the amount of grip those other ones do, so we'll see good wheel spin coming out of them. Overall, super impressed with this kit, how easy the swap was, how straightforward everything was, how it all fit, and the fact that we didn't really have to trim all that much out of the machine, a lot less than I had expected. This is basically all we trimmed out of it. Okay, the moment of truth. Let's see if this all was worth it. Let's fire the beast up and see how that diff works. We're out back in the field, so let's hit that 4x4 switch and see what happens. Okay, we are in 2 low. Let's pop it into 4. Moment of truth. Nothing is grinding. Nothing has exploded yet. Good start. So we'll dip down into this ravine and then we'll crawl out of it.
a working front diff. It engages and pulls and hooks up a lot better than my old diff actually, which probably means that old one was more messed up than I thought. So that front diff is definitely working. The engagement feels great, the switch is functioning. Obviously, it's plug and play. As long as the connector is engaged and there's power getting to it, it's a brand new diff, everything should be fine. But obviously you gotta test that. Anyways, the best part is coming. It's time to push the bar. It's time to test the limits. So once again, thanks guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video enjoyable. I hope you found it thorough. I hope it answered all your questions. And if it didn't, leave me a comment in the comment section. Let's get some conversation started. If you have some tips or tricks because you've done this or you know something I didn't mention or I messed something up, get in there, chime in, let everyone else know. If you're thinking it, someone else probably is too. I hope I covered all the bases. I hope everything looked good. If you did like it, please do smash that thumbs up button. And also subscribe to the channel if you found this helpful, because it really helps the videos rank. Check out some of our trail riding videos and stay tuned because we'll be pushing the limits of this machine on all sorts of different tires and terrain. Right now we're just gonna go break this diff in and I'm gonna put some mileage on it, wear everything in. I'm done talking. I know this is a long one, but if you made it this far, thanks a lot. If you'd like to help support the channel, then make sure you check out our Shopify store. You can get some cool Team AJP swag there, shirts, stickers, sweaters, stuff like that. If you're ordering the Hill Killer kit through Joe Kaufman, make sure you let him know I sent you and you saw this video. Get out there to ride, guys, and ride safe.